Chapter 66. Night Before. A.N. The night before everyone sets sail for the Iron Islands. XXX. Asha sneaks into the king's tent the night before they're set to depart. Because of course she does. Though, she's not actually expecting to succeed. The plan is to be caught and raise a fuss until Axel himself appears and approves her presence. She's certainly not anticipating making it all the way into his tent undetected. In fact, doing so leaves the female Ironborn scowling, even as she gazes down at Axel's sleeping visage. After barely a moment of thinking about it, she jumps on top of him and puts a finger against his neck. Leaning in close, she hisses angrily into his ear. If I were an enemy and my finger was steel, you would be dead, Axel Baratheon. Your Kingsguard are incompetent and should be replaced. Without even opening his eyes, Axel just chuckles. Are they? I told them to let you through, Asha. Wait, what? Asha blinks as Axel finally opens his eyes and grins up at her. Then, his gaze flicks over to the entrance to his tent. It's fine, Sandor. You can return to your post. Asha's head jerks around as only then does she hear the telltale sound of armor lightly clinking as the hound shifts from where he'd apparently been standing ready, just out of sight. As Sandor Clegane moves away from the tent again, Asha looks back to see Axel smirking up at her rather smugly. She's not pouting. She's definitely not pouting. Even still, Asha can't help but huff and shake her head as she removes her finger from under the king's chin. Even still, I could have killed you before they intervened. You're far too trusting, Axel Baratheon. His hands abruptly come up and grab onto her hips in a familiar manner that makes Asha's breath hitch. She wiggles atop him, blushing a bit as she feels his cock already starting to rise beneath her. It's been much too long since their first time together. It seems that they both know precisely why she's here. I don't think my trust has been misplaced. Unless Euron Greyjoy's sea monster has given you second thoughts. Asha flushes at Axel's teasing tone and begins to shuck off her clothing without a hint of embarrassment right then and there. Fuck holding back anymore. Fuck waiting for him to come to her. And fuck you. Chuckling again, Axel runs his hands across her body as she exposes more and more of it. Very well then. You have my permission. It takes Asha a moment to parse the joke, at which point she goes still for a moment, eyes narrowed as she glares down at him. But in the end, she wants his cock more than she wants to punish him for such terrible humor. As soon as she's ready, she reaches down and fishes Axel's cock free of his trousers, bringing it to her slit and pressing him up inside of her with little fanfare or foreplay. Axel in turn helps her with the positioning, and then of course, as she should have expected, he uses his grip on her hips to slam her down the length of his cock without hesitation. Asha's jaw drops open and she chokes on her own spit as his throbbing member punches up inside of her like nothing else. Truly, the king and his big fat cock are like absolutely nothing else that Asha has ever had. Fortunately, that initial thrust steals the breath from her lungs so she doesn't do anything too embarrassing like squeal or scream upon penetration. Unfortunately, he almost immediately begins to slide her up and down his cock, his hands like iron on her waist, and that begins to prompt some rather humiliating sounds from her lips. Before she can make too much of a fool of herself with such noises, Asha leans forward and captures Axel's mouth with her own. She kisses him deeply and applies her tongue to the experience for good measure. This helps to stifle her moaning and mewling and the pleasured cries that threaten to slip free of her lips. She honestly hates being a woman sometimes. There have been so many moments where she wished she were a man instead. But here and now, as she bounces up and down on Axel's cock, there's something inexplicably incredible about it all. The pleasure gets to her quickly, her muffled moans growing in volume by the moment. Asha tries her best to keep up, to give as good as she gets. She's on top after all, and in her personal experience that usually means she's in control. Even the biggest of men can't do much when put on their backs. Or so she'd always thought. Axel is very much proving that wrong right now in every possible way. He does more than just take control, he overwhelms her senses with everything he's doing to her. Even their kissing, his tongue wrestles hers into submission so fast Asha can only blink and moan, her eyes fluttering as she feels a poignant sense of disbelief for a second. This is ridiculous, it feels even better than it did the last time, back in that alley. But she refuses to be beaten. Ending the lip lock with a growl, the Ironborn woman leans forward and plants her breasts in Axel's face instead, intent on smothering him just a tad. Sure, she's not the most well-endowed. Thank fuck for that. If she had the same size tits as, say, Arianne Martell, Asha thinks she might have tried to cut them off years ago. Either that or killed herself. But that isn't to say she doesn't have nothing in the chest department. A mere cup full of soft flesh apiece. Sensitive nipples that grow hard when she's aroused. That's what she shoves into Axel's face, hoping to get the better of him if only for a second. Of course, that doesn't go according to plan either. He's not overwhelmed in the slightest. If anything, Asha belatedly realizes that she's just given him another avenue to attack from. Axel's tongue and teeth rush across her chest as she buries his face in her tits. He swirls his tongue around a nipple one moment and then nibbles and bites at the other a moment later. Asha tosses her head back, a strangled moan leaving her lips before she bites her tongue and tries her best to hold back her voice even as he makes her feel so weak. There's no hope for her though. She's a fool if she thought she could ever defeat Axel Baratheon on this particular battlefield. Plap, plap, plap. Her hips slam down onto his cock as it thrusts up into her again and again, until she can't take it anymore. With a rattling cry, Asha tips over the edge, her pussy walls squeezing even as they gush down his length. Axel grunts in response, and then keeps fucking her. Asha's eyes widen at this, her overly sensitive cunt not at all ready for him to just keep going. Before she knows it, she's letting out another cry. And another. Finally, she takes her breasts away from Axel's mouth and buries her face in his chest, clinging to him for dear life as he fucks and fucks her with no end in sight. Then, all of a sudden, she's on her back. Asha gasps, staring up into Axel's eyes as he smiles down at her. He pumps in and out of her a few more times, making her moan and shudder beneath him. And then he pulls out and unloads upon her naked flesh, covering her tits and her abdomen in his seed. Asha's cunt aches at the loss of both his cock and the lack of a filling, but she knows, deep down inside, that she has no desire for him to risk impregnating her anyways. The whole idea of pregnancy is abhorrent to her. Being forced to grow weaker and weaker all because of some parasite growing inside of her. It's the worst part of being a woman, by far. However, as Axel lays down beside her, still smiling, Asha doesn't hesitate to scoop up some of the seed he's left on her body and stick her fingers in her mouth. Salty and sweet, not a bad taste, all things considered. And she can tell Axel approves. As she licks her fingers clean, she gazes at him curiously. You really aren't worried, are you? Axel raises an eyebrow. About what? Your uncle. His kraken. No, I'm not worried. I'm more worried about what comes afterwards than I am about Euron fucking Greyjoy. Asha lets out a shuddering breath at that. He's that confident that he'll win. He's so convinced of his victory that he's already thinking about what happens after. Meanwhile, she's afraid that tomorrow she'll lose her ship to Euron's damn kraken. She's afraid they'll all die because the sea monster will pull them under one boat at a time. Perhaps that's why Axel is the king and she's just a captain though. And to be fair, now she's wondering what comes next herself. What comes after you kill my uncle then? Axel's smile drops, his face growing more serious and thoughtful. Finally, he lets out a sigh and shakes his head. I don't know. I've been advised not to be merciful with the Ironborn, you know. And I can't help but agree. Would this be happening if my father had been smart and wiped out House Greyjoy entirely, root and stem? If he'd put your father and your uncles to the sword for daring to rebel against their king, then we wouldn't be dealing with this shit right now. Euron Greyjoy would already be dead. Asha bristles a bit because of what that implies for her, but before she can point out the obvious, Axel does it for her. Of course, if my father had done the smart thing, then would you still live? Perhaps, though you might have been sent to the Silent Sisters or given to some other noble lord as a prize bride. You wouldn't be who you are today, captain of your own ship, so vivacious and strong and sexy. Great, now she's fucking blushing. He had a way with words, Asha would give him that. The problem isn't even really House Greyjoy, Asha. It's your people's entire way of life. It's the Ironborn in general. The desire to return to the old ways. The need to make others pay the iron price. Asha shivers as a shadow suddenly falls over Axel's face. For instance, if I chose to practice the iron price, then after I kill Euron and his pet kraken, the Iron Islands would cease to exist. Everything would be plundered. The warriors would be killed to the last. The thralls and salt wives would be returned to their homes or spread throughout the Seven Kingdoms and given new lives as serfs under Greenlander lords. Asha's breath hitches in her throat as she finds herself imagining it. The Iron Islands were a cluster of barely fertile rocky landmasses. Surviving there was hard and thriving there, thriving was quite literally impossible without the Ironborn at least partially resorting to the old ways. To the iron price. Taking from those who had it better than them on the mainland had been her people's way of not just proving their innate strength but also building themselves up even stronger for thousands upon thousands of years. And yet, he's right. If Axel chose to follow their own ancient traditions after he won, if he managed to win the following battles and conquered the Iron Islands, then the Iron Price would allow him to take everything not nailed down, and then everything that was nailed down as well, if he really wanted to. Her cunt clenches around empty air and Asha licks her lips for a moment before asking the question on the tip of her tongue. And what would you do with me, in such a scenario? Keep me as your woman. As a trophy. Axel looks at her oddly for a moment before letting out a snort of laughter. His hand comes down on her inner thigh and squeezes, making Asha's breath hitch. Try not to sound so longing for it, you wench. Damn, I was trying to scare you with the idea, not turn you on even more for fuck's sake. That, Asha blushes hard, scowling and then throwing a hard punch straight at Axel's chest. He catches her wrist before she can land the blow though, moving so fast that her eyes widen in shock. Don't. You would have broken your hand on me if that had landed. What? Asha stares in confusion, even as Axel lets out a sigh and shakes his head. You'll see soon enough, I suppose. Look, I'm not planning to enact the Iron Price on the Iron Islands, Asha. But, your people followed Euron without hesitation. Without even one of your kingsmoots. All because he had a big fucking monster on his side. So once I kill his monster and once I kill Euron Greyjoy, there will have to be consequences. Punishment. I just haven't decided what form that will take yet. Asha licks her lips and, she has to try at least. Even if he's right, they're still her people, so she has to try to lighten the load. Put Theon on the throne. That'll be punishment enough, I reckon. Axel snorts derisively at that, shaking his head and grinning in wry amusement. I've met the man myself at this point and you might be right about that. But then they'll just kill him, won't they? And we'll be right back where we started. That draws a flinch. He's probably right. She'd made a token effort to talk to her brother after he'd arrived in camp alongside the Northmen. It had been an interesting conversation, mostly filled with Theon boasting about how he would push his claim once their uncle was dead. And yet, he didn't even bother trying to feel her out. Nor had he so much as asked for her support. Like it didn't even matter that she was captain of her own ship. The truth was, Theon wouldn't last for even a single year as Lord Reaper of Pike. Someone would kill him. Might even be her if he was enough of a prick about it. Maybe I'll put you in charge instead. It would be the first Lady Reaper of Pike in Ironborn history, wouldn't it? How's that for a shake-up? Asha blinks, staring at Axel for a long moment as she realizes, he's serious. Sure, he's grinning, but he's not teasing so much as he's testing. Part of her likes the idea very much. Part of her wonders if she'd survive the year either. They might just kill me the same as they'd kill Theon. Axel grunts, looking quite displeased by that idea. Maybe. They'd respect you more than him though, at the end of the day. At least you're a captain, right? She wordlessly nods at that. He's not wrong, she'd probably be slightly more tolerable than her brother, even to the most hardline of Ironborn. Silence falls between them for a long moment after that. Then, Axel looks her right in the eyes. Would you want it, if it were an option? If the opportunity arises? Blinking again, Asha hesitates for a moment. Does she want it? To be not just in charge of the Iron Islands, but the first woman in history to lead from Castle Pike. Fuck, of course she does. But she still has tits and a cunt and that was unacceptable in the eyes of her people. Then again, depending on how Axel did it. Finally, almost shyly but no less enthusiastically, Asha nods. Yes, I would leap at such an opportunity with both hands. How could I not? To lead my people, no matter what state they're left in after all of this, yes. I would want it. Then, she averts her gaze, feeling a bit embarrassed by her reaction. Axel just chuckles though. Hey, see. What comes after the upcoming battles is much more important than the battles themselves. Euron's defeat is already a done deal. It's the rest of it that's so fucking complex. Now, get some rest, Asha. Or do I need to fuck you again to put you to sleep properly? This fucking bastard of a king. Asha scoffs and spreads her legs for him all the same. Giving him a hooded look, she smirks wickedly. You have my permission, my king. Axel laughs at her throwing his words back at him. Then, he moves between her legs and, well, the rest of it is a bit of a blur when she wakes up the next morning. But damn if she isn't left just as satisfied as she is sore. XXX. Asha finally gets another turn. Next time, Axel and company set sail. 5 comments 0 vote. Chapter 67. Out to sea. Just a nice little sea voyage where nothing important happens. XXX. It occurs to Axel, only after they've set sail, that he's actually never been out at sea before now. Between living in the area all his life and the last several months of insanity in King's Landing, he just hadn't gotten the chance. Perhaps he could have gotten some experience by traveling with the royal fleet while his armies moved overland, but he just hadn't really thought about it at the time. Fortunately for him, he doesn't seem to have any issues with seasickness or balance. Nor does he need any time whatsoever to get his sea legs. While the swaying and rocking of his flagship is definitely different than standing on dry land, it's not particularly awful or even unpleasant. In fact, there's something almost soothing about it, even if they are traveling to war. Staring out into the horizon for a moment, Axel looks to his left and right. An armada of ships of all different shapes and sizes surrounds him in every direction. The Royal Fleet and the Redwyne Fleet combined are truly a sight to behold, and they're lucky that neither suffered all that many losses against one another before Renly lost his trial by the Seven. Renly. Back in the Vale, when Axel had been preparing to execute Petter Baelish for his crimes, the weasel of a man had let several things slip. Things that the traitorous master of coin had considered of great import. Among them was the fact that it was Euron Greyjoy who gave Renly Baratheon the Valyrian steel sword that even now rests at Axel's waist. Reaching down, Axel runs a hand over Stoneheart's pommel, stroking it for a moment before sighing and shaking his head. If Axel had pressed harder for Renly to tell him where Stoneheart, or as it was initially named, Rosethorn, had come from, he might have found out about Euron Greyjoy and his machinations earlier. Perhaps he could have even nipped things in the bud before this whole war could even start. Then again, he doubts it. Euron's pet Kraken gave the Greyjoy too much sway over his people, and too much confidence in his own abilities. Sending anyone out to hunt Euron Greyjoy down would have just gotten them killed by the Kraken. Barring Axel going out and hunting down Euron to tear him limb from limb with his own hands, there was no stopping this. And Jon would have advised caution on that front. And Axel would have foolishly listened until everything happened exactly the same way in the end. Are you well, Your Grace? Blinking as he's pulled from his thoughts, Axel turns to see that his master of ships has stepped up beside him. Lord Davos Seaworth actually looks concerned for him, and it dawns on Axel that he's probably just now realizing the king has no experience at sea either. Chuckling, he gives the older man a smile and a nod. I'm fine, Lord Davos. Is everything going well? Everyone staying in formation? Given the nature of the Kraken's size along with the absurd size of their fleet, this was a combination of two of Westeros' biggest naval forces. After all, Lord Seaworth and his Redwyne counterpart had decided on a plan that involved spreading the fleet out a great deal over a rather large area. Not so far spread that the ships couldn't see one another, mind you. But still far enough that the Kraken, even if it was as large as the ruins of Lannisport suggested, wouldn't be able to destroy more than a couple of ships just by breaching the surface. And once it was entangled in those ships, the others could all surround it and begin firing on it, presumably. As it had already been explained to Axel, there was no such thing as nimble or quick when they had this many ships. Not unless they split the fleet in two, of course. Fortunately, that had been deemed a bad idea by Davos and the Redwyne admiral, because otherwise Axel would have had to step in and put his foot down. He wasn't about to be with the wrong fleet when this sea monster that Euron Greyjoy commanded came knocking. Still, they had to be ready. They had to be prepared. The closer and closer they got to the Iron Islands, the more likely that they would have a battle on their hands. After eyeing Axel for a time and seemingly deciding that his king wasn't just putting on a brave face, Davos finally nods. Aye, Your Grace. Everyone is still accounted for. No sightings of Ironborn vessels or Krakens just yet. Of course, as if to prove him wrong. Ironborn on the horizon. The warning shout comes down to them from up in the crow's nest, causing Axel and Davos to both look out into the distance. The Ironborn ships are just specks at this point, but Davos nevertheless curses and begins belting out orders. On either side, even with them far away, Axel can hear the captains on the ships closest to them doing the same, their voices carrying on the wind like some sort of siren's song. And then, a horn blast. But it's not one of theirs, Axel is pretty sure. He steps up to the railing, looking off in the distance towards the Ironborn fleet. However, it's not the Ironborn fleet that he's worried about. It never has been. There's still dozens of miles of ocean between them and the enemy. But that distant horn hadn't come from anywhere around him, it had come from in front of them. Axel's eyes narrow thoughtfully as he looks at the water. It looks darker, doesn't it? No, that's not a trick of the light. That's a shape beneath the waves. And it's coming right for them. The horn summons the kraken and sends it after a target. Axel knows this instinctively somehow. He can feel it in his bones. Just as he can feel in his bones that if he lets the kraken reach them, it will sink this ship and drown everyone on it except for him. And then it will be among his fleet and able to do untold damage to everyone. No. That cannot be allowed to happen. Axel turns to Davos as what he has to do crystallizes in his mind's eye. Lord Davos. It takes a moment for his shout to reach the other man, and if Axel were anyone else, he's sure that his master of ships would have ignored him and focused on the task at hand. But he is the king, and in the end, Lord Seaworth turns to him, confused and looking quite harried at this point. Yes, Your Grace. I'm going to go kill the Kraken. Relay orders to the rest of the fleet to avoid the beast and aim for the Ironborn. I want them run the fuck down, all the way back to their shitty little islands. Again, amidst all the hustle and bustle, Davos doesn't immediately understand what Axel is saying. He's already moving down the stairs towards the deck for the front of the ship when the former smuggler races to the railing and calls out to him. My king. What are you saying? Come back. Turning back, Axel locks eyes with his master of ships and gives him a cheery grin. Despite the distance between them now, he makes sure his words carry all the same. You've got this, Seaworth. See you soon. And then Axel turns and leaps. Wood splinters beneath his feet as he jumps, causing him to wince a little bit, but it probably wasn't anything too bad and the ship could always be fixed later. Besides, he has more important things to worry about. Drawing Stoneheart while he's in midair, Axel roars as he flings himself through the sky. For a brief moment, he imagines he looks rather insane to the men of both his fleets, soaring through the air towards the Ironborn, but much too far away to actually reach their boats. That's okay though, because the Ironborn fleet was never the goal. Looking down from his new vantage point high above it all, Axel can more clearly see the massive dark shape beneath the ocean waves now. Sucking as deep a breath as he can manage, he grins savagely and points Stoneheart's tip straight down. A moment later he hits the water like a fucking stone, sinking immediately and feeling his Valyrian steel sword bite deep into something immense, meaty, and very thick-skinned. Then, almost instantly, something else slams into Axel's body, ripping him off of the Kraken's back. Fortunately his grip on Stoneheart is ironclad, or he might have lost the Valyrian steel sword in the sea monster's flesh right then and there. Instead, he's able to rip it out, dragging it through thick skin and dense flesh before it finally comes free. At the same time, everything goes dark. It takes Axel a moment to realize that this is because the Kraken has swung him under it, putting its immense bulk between him and the ocean's surface as it tries to beat him down with its appendages. Axel is fighting blind, but that isn't going to stop him. He's only ever swam in lakes and rivers up in the mountains, but that isn't going to stop him either. The water all around him certainly doesn't stop him from swinging Stoneheart rapidly, slicing through the beast in front of him. The Kraken is so big that it's impossible for him to miss. At the same time though, Axel does briefly wonder how the fuck he's supposed to kill the damn thing. Stoneheart might be able to cut through its flesh, but that doesn't mean much when there's this much flesh. He won't stop though. Axel can't stop, not now. Moving underwater is easy, at least. Surprisingly so. Axel was expecting to get a little bit bogged down, but instead he finds himself swimming more easily in the water than he walks on land. Still, Euron's pet is no slouch. The Kraken isn't just big, it's strong. In fact, it's possibly the strongest thing that Axel has ever faced. Every single swipe of one of its tentacles actually knocks Axel around down here, even causing him some pain in the process as he's battered to and fro. The problem, really, is that he's like a blind gnat harassing this thing from all angles. As it tosses him around, the pain it's visiting upon him is more soreness than agony, but at the same time, he feels like he's not really hurting it either. Valyrian steel cuts through it just fine, but the thing is so big that his sword might as well be a damn sewing needle for all the damage it's doing. At the same time, Axel realizes that the beast has some intelligence to it. Because right now, it's trying to push him deeper. Trying to take him all the way down to the sea floor. Does it think to drown him? Maybe. Does it want to pin him to the bottom of the ocean until he runs out of air and expires? You know, there was something to be said about that. Axel grins, even though he can't see. As he's pushed deeper and deeper, he makes a show of swinging Stoneheart around, slicing through the Kraken here and there to make it clear he's still fighting, still struggling. At the same time though, he's no longer trying so hard to get back to the surface, not that he was before. He's no longer fighting to outmaneuver the Kraken either, instead allowing it to box him in like it clearly wants to. Until finally, Axel's back hits stone. The Kraken smashes him into rock, but Axel barely feels it. A tentacle bigger than his flagship pins him to some sort of solid surface. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Finally, at long last, Axel stops sandbagging. Now that he has something to brace himself against, he shows far more of his true strength. First, he lifts the tentacle trying to pin him down, pushing it up until he can stand. More tentacles join the first in trying to keep him pinned, but that just lets Axel pinpoint exactly where the Kraken's main body is. And once he knows that, he grins savagely, points Stoneheart straight up, and pushes off of the sea floor beneath his feet. Crackthum. Sand, rock, and water explode out from Axel in all directions as he truly lets himself move. Stoneheart points the way and he stabs into and then through the Kraken on top of him, still trying to pin him down. He keeps going from there, propelled forward by the blast, absolutely flying through the water, until finally, he breaches the surface and positively soars up into the sky. Honestly, he's not expecting that. It must be the fastest he's ever moved before, even faster than his run from King's Landing to the Bloody Gate. For a split second, Axel is able to look around and see a rather strange sight. The location where he and the Kraken have been fighting has become a no-man's land. It's like a treacherous whirlpool with the waters choppy as all hell and tentacles thrashing about this way and that. Boats that get too close are almost sucked in, and all of them suffer damage to their hulls. They suffer a lot more than just some hull damage if they can't avoid the tentacles. But that's not important, because Axel knows the Kraken isn't dead yet. Looking down beneath him, he can see the dark shape beneath the water getting larger and larger again as it follows him back towards the surface. He's dealt it a grievous blow, but not a fatal one. Even drilling through its entire body with his sword hadn't been enough. That was alright though, he would fall back down any moment now and do it again and wait a second. Why wasn't he falling? Axel blinks owlishly as he looks down at himself and finally realizes that he's hovering in midair. To be fair, it feels exactly like what he was doing underwater. Had he even been swimming down there? Or was he flying, the entire time? Before he can ponder that further though, Euron's Kraken breaches the water below. Screeching its rage and anger, bleeding profusely from the path he'd cut through it with his body, it reaches for him with multiple massive appendages. Axel bares his teeth in response and points his sword down at the damn thing's open beak. He'd figure out what was happening with him suddenly flying later. Right now, he had a monster to kill. Bracing himself against seemingly nothing at all as the Kraken reaches for him with its massive appendages, Axel points Stoneheart downward once more, and this time doesn't just drop. This time, in a way he can't explain, he leaps forward from not but midair, lancing downwards with a roar to answer the Kraken's injured, furious screech. It was time to finish this once and for all. XXX. That's right ladies and gentlemen. He flies now. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 68. Kraken's demise. Poor Davos, lol. XXX. Signal the rest of the fleet to steer clear of the whirlpool. Relay orders to focus on the Ironborn ships and to fire at will. One would think Davos Seaworth would be used to dealing with the insanity of his superiors at this point. After all, he's been in the service of Stannis Baratheon for more than 20 years now. Not that he's regretted a single day of it, mind you. Most men might have thought less of Stannis for daring to punish them after they went out of their way to smuggle food to a castle under siege. But Davos wasn't most men. Besides, people often mistold the story anyways, making him sound more altruistic than he actually was. He hadn't braved the Redwyne fleet's blockade of Shipbreaker Bay and snuck his way into Storm's End out of the kindness of his heart or anything like that. No, he'd done so as a calculated risk, knowing full well that starving men would pay him a better price than men with full bellies who didn't have to worry where their next meal was coming from. It was opportunistic and selfish, just as accepting Lord Stannis' deal had been. For the cost of a ship's worth of onions and salted fish, along with the first joint from each finger on his left hand, Davos had bought something that he considered far more valuable than any amount of gold. He'd bought a future for both him and his family. And what a future it had turned out to be. 20 years on and 7 sons, Davos could safely say that he had no regrets. If anything, he was more baffled by just how far he'd risen. It was one thing to serve under Stannis as a landed knight. It was another entirely for him to be promoted to master of ships and be given command of the entire damn royal fleet. Yet here he was all the same, commanding not just the royal fleet but the Redwyne fleet as well, the combined force of ships enough to completely outnumber their enemies under any normal circumstances. Unfortunately, these were not normal circumstances. The Ironborn had a secret weapon in the form of the greatest, largest kraken that Davos Seaworth had ever heard of, let alone seen with his own two eyes. And the damn king had leapt into the water to fight it. As he throws out orders left and right, trying his best to keep an eye on the developing sea battle, Davos' gaze unfortunately keeps gravitating back to the center of this entire mess. Despite them all being at open sea, there's a chunk of water that has developed into a place no one wants to go between them and the Ironborn fleet, forcing them to go around it to get at their enemies. This island, as impossible as it is the massive main body of Euron Greyjoy's kraken, thrashing up the water and making the waves incredibly choppy in the process. For a time, it had descended deep beneath the surface, but that hadn't stopped the water in the center of the battle from being incredibly treacherous as well as dangerous. Now, it was back near the surface again, and it was all Davos could do to wonder what the hell was going on. After all, from the moment the king leapt overboard, Davos had thought him lost. What could one man, even one equipped with a Valyrian steel sword, possibly do against a creature of this size? Their only hope had been to try and kill it with bolts from the scorpions, but even then Davos had assumed they would lose dozens of ships in the process. But no. Axel Baratheon had decided otherwise. The king hadn't waited for the kraken to reach them. He hadn't waited for the monster to make the first move. Instead, he'd thrown himself into the water to fight it. And the craziest thing was, he was still alive down there, as far as Davos could tell. The master of ships can't pay too much attention to what's going on in the water, to be fair. He still has a fleet to lead and a naval battle to win, after all. But the mere fact that the kraken has yet to attack a single one of their ships tells a story. It makes it clear that the king is still down there fighting and keeping the damn thing distracted, somehow. How? Davos doesn't fucking know. But it's not his place to question it either. Besides, so long as Euron's beast is out of the picture, the Ironborn are outnumbered 3-1. They can't possibly win this, though there hasn't been a retreat called yet. Probably because they think it's only a matter of time before the king. Davos' head snaps around so fast he's pretty sure he hears a crack. His eyes go towards where a sailor is pointing over the choppy waters in the middle of the battle, but there's nothing there. What are you pointing at, sailor? Get back to work. But I swear Lord Seaworth, I swear I saw him. Furrowing his brow, Davos stomps over, staring out at the water. He shouldn't let himself get distracted, but who is he kidding, he's already fucking distracted. Where? What did you see, man? I saw the king in the air. He was floating, he was, I swear it. And then, the kraken breached and was reaching for him, but he went back down. Shot down like a scorpion bolt, he did. Davos grimaces as he tries to make sense of the sailor's rambling. It sounded like the kraken had probably thrown Axel up into the air for a moment and then the king had fallen back down. How the hell he was surviving such things, Davos didn't know, but then to be fair, nobody could explain how he'd survived the wildfire either, at least to Davos' satisfaction. The seven had healed him. Maybe, but Davos had never been a very religious man, so he couldn't be sure. The master of ships opens his mouth to tell the sailor to get back to his work, but before he can, a shadow suddenly falls over the ship. Davos turns, half expecting to see one of the kraken's massive appendages bearing down on them right then and there, but it's not quite that. It is one of the kraken's tentacles, thicker around than a damn castle tower and larger than anything Davos has seen in all his years on the seas. However, it's not coming towards them. Rather, it's pulled out from the water, stretching up into the sky, and at the top of it, Davos can make out a person if he squints. What the bloody hell? Pulling a Myrish far eye from his belt, Davos quickly points the thing at what must be the king of Westeros. What he sees, takes his breath away and leaves him even more frozen in shock than ever before. But then to be fair, even if he won't learn about this until later, most of the men in the naval battle have turned to stare at this point in time, so it's not like he's alone in his stupor. At first glance, Davos had assumed that the kraken held Axel Baratheon in its clutches. But that's not the case. No, rather, it's the king who is holding onto the kraken's appendage. He's flying. There's no other way to describe it. His feet are touching nothing and he's pulling the kraken up, his face scrunched up in concentration and exertion. Euron Greyjoy's monster comes out of the water foot by bloody foot, revealing several massive, gore-caked holes lancing through its main body. Davos finds himself staring at one blankly for a long moment before realizing that he's actually staring all the way through one of the holes out the other side, where he can see ships exchanging fire in the distance like some sort of weird tunnel view. Only for a split second though, as the king continues to lift and the kraken comes further out of the water. It's dead, Davos finally realizes. Euron's kraken is dead as can be, blood enough to drown 1,000 men pouring out of its wounds and into the water beneath it as the massive monster dangles limply from Baratheon's grasp. How? How is this possible? The king is flying. The king just killed a kraken by himself with nothing but a single Valyrian steel sword. And now he's somehow lifting something more than 100 times his size without any help. Davos might have had more than 20 years to get used to Stannis Baratheon's particular brand of insanity, but he's finally starting to realize that the Lord doesn't hold a damn candle to his nephew's madness. Indeed, Baratheon's particular brand of crazy seems intent on dragging the rest of the world with it. XXX. So he flies now apparently. Funnily enough, it's not that surprising when he takes a moment to really think about it. In fact, part of him feels like he should have always known he could do this. Another part wonders if his week-long bath in wildfire might have awakened something new in him. Something beyond what he'd already been capable of. Either way, he's done it. The kraken is dead. All that's left is to take out the trash. As he rises to his apex high above the naval battle going on below, kraken held by its appendage, Axel tries to figure what he's going to do next. He considers his options, but truth be told, there aren't many good ones. Maybe he should just let the damn thing's corpse drop back into the water and sink to the bottom of the ocean, but he's loath to waste it. However, his first instinct, which had been to toss the thing at the Ironborn fleet, isn't a good idea either. By now, his enemies have split in half just like the combined Royal and Redwyne fleets. They've sailed around his and the Kraken's part of the battlefield, in order to do battle with his ships. If he throws the Kraken at either half of the Ironborn fleet, he's likely to cause collateral damage among his own men. Brave men who had come all this way to fight in his name. No, Axel won't do that, even if the idea of killing Euron Greyjoy with the carcass of his own damn beast is tempting for a fleeting moment. Only fleeting though, because Axel really wants to kill the warmongering bastard with his own two hands while looking him in the eyes. That still leaves him with a massive Kraken corpse though, and oh, now there was an idea. He hadn't realized it, but they're actually not too far off from the Iron Islands at this point. Out there in the distance, past where the Ironborn fleet had come from, Axel can even make out what he thinks is Pike if he squints hard enough. Yeah, that would work. Or rather, he hoped it would. He's never actually done something like this before, after all. Slowly, he begins to spin. Holding onto the Kraken's tentacle is easy enough despite its size, though making sure the damn thing doesn't tear off and leave the main body to drop into the water below is a bit tougher. Eventually though, Axel gets a good swing going. He spins around and around, but he finds he has no problem maintaining his balance and sense of direction the entire time. It really does feel like he was made for this flight. He just had to figure out how it worked. Huffing and puffing, exerting himself more than he's ever done in his life, Axel builds up enough momentum that the Kraken's body is spinning through the air with him at this point. And then, at what he hopes is just the right moment, he lets go and the Kraken gets to fly too, albeit posthumously. A grin spreads across Axel's face as he watches the carcass sail through the air. 100 miles. 200 miles. 300, he thinks he hits his target. But he can't be sure, not from this distance. And as tempting as it is to fly over really quick and check, Axel isn't about to abandon his people, not even if they have the numerical advantage in a big way. Thwip. Instinctively, Axel tilts his head to the side and the thick wooden trunk of a scorpion bolt goes sailing past his face by half an inch. His eyes narrow as he turns and looks down at where it came from. Staring up at him in slowly mounting horror are Ironborn men crewing an Ironborn ship near the edge of the waters where he and Euron's Kraken had their cataclysmic battle. A slow, wicked smile spreads across Axel's face and he draws Stoneheart from its sheath once more. He'd put the Valyrian steel away once he realized the Kraken was dead, but he no longer needs both hands to carry the damn thing. The king points his sword down at the Ironborn ship like it's the point of a spear, and then he drops. Ironborn sailors howl and scream as he comes down like a comet, Stoneheart's tip piercing right through the chest of the man standing at the ship's helm. And then further still, as Axel rips through the entire Ironborn ship from top to bottom. Only once he's in the water below does he shake the corpse off of his blade and then thrust himself back up, coming out the top again through another part of the boat. Just like that, the Ironborn galley is already taking on water, two massive man-shaped holes causing it to start to sink at a rapid pace. But Axel barely pays it any mind. He's already looking for the next ship, where he does the exact same thing. Again and again, Axel flies forward, treating himself like an impossibly tough, impossibly fast, entirely reusable scorpion bolt. Some of the Ironborn try to fight back, firing at him or even attempting to swing at him with their axes in the brief moments that he flies past them. None can do a thing to him though. They can't even break his skin, even as Axel breaks their boats, one by one. Until eventually, he breaks their spirits. Coming up out of the water as another Ironborn ship begins to sink, Axel looks and sees the portion of the Ironborn fleet that he hadn't managed to get to yet has turned and begun fleeing back towards the Iron Islands. His own fleets quickly give chase, of course. Seeing this, Axel nods his approval, and then focuses on one Ironborn vessel in particular. Black sails. Red hull. Everyone has told him in detail what Euron Greyjoy's ship looks like. Euron is retreating to the Iron Islands as well. For a moment, Axel considers stopping him here and now. It would be easy to destroy his boat and drown the man right here and right now. But no, where would the fun in that be? He'd have a lot of unhappy knights and warriors on his hands if they didn't get to partake in a single fight, after all. Besides, he wants them to see what he's done to Pike. He wants Euron in particular to see what he's done before the man dies a dog's death. XXX. AN. Axel is having fun now. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 69. Euron's Fall. AN. No sex this chapter despite the funny number. But that doesn't mean someone doesn't get fucked lol. XXX. The Baratheon king sought to add insult to injury. Euron had felt the moment that the Kraken died to the depths of his soul. The connection between him and the creature facilitated by the horn he'd scavenged from old Valyria had snapped and left him gasping for air. He'd barely been able to give the orders for the thralls and mongrels who crewed the Silence to turn the damn boat around and make for Pike at full speed. However, feeling it was one thing. Seeing was something else entirely. He'd watched as the Baratheon king, somehow hovering unassisted in midair, tossed the Kraken's carcass. Everyone had seen it, obviously. But what Euron hadn't realized was just where Axel Baratheon had thrown his Kraken. Not until he got back to the Iron Islands anyways. There, impaled on the tallest, somewhat pointed tower of Castle Pike, was the Kraken's carcass. Axel had thrown it in such a way that the massive beast had come down and been skewered like a normal squid upon a fishing spear atop the castle tower, leaving House Greyjoy's symbol to adorn their seat like some cruel mockery of everything they believed in, everything they held dear. To make things even worse, it was obvious that Axel had let them go too. Or rather, let him go. The Baratheon king had destroyed more than half of the Ironborn fleet. With how fast he'd been moving, he could have easily run down Euron's ship as well, but he hadn't. Axel had allowed Euron and the rest of his forces to run back here so they could see what he'd done, to truly demoralize them. My king, what do we do now? What is the drowned god's will? Euron doesn't even bother looking over at Damfair. Victarion was gone, dead and drowned with his ship. But of course Damfair still lived, the priest of the drowned god having been waiting here on Pike for them to return victorious. They hadn't, obviously, and yet, Aeron Greyjoy still believed that Euron had a plan. He still believed that the drowned god would see them all to victory. It was enough to make Euron want to fucking spit blood. He watches on as the Ironborn that remain struggle to prepare for the oncoming fleet. The armies of Westeros are at their doorstep, the one place they never should have been able to reach. Their ships can be seen from one end of the horizon to the other and they get closer and closer with each passing second. Euron, Werk. It's enough to make him see red and his pathetic little brother isn't helping things with his whining. And so Euron gives into his impulses, draws his sword from his belt, and turns to sink it into his last living brother's gut. Aeron's eyes are wide with disbelief as he chokes on his own blood, seemingly shocked that Euron would do such a thing. He's not sure why his younger brother is so surprised though. After all, he'd killed Balon too hadn't he? He was already a kinslayer anyways. Not that it mattered anymore. None of it mattered anymore. Kicking Damfair back off of his sword, Euron wipes the Valyrian steel blade clean on the dying man's robes and turns back to watching the enemy approach. He lets out a shuddering breath before looking down to the ocean between him and the ships. Well, you're the one who wanted me to kill the bastard. You're the one who stole my life from me, just to turn me into your attack dog. What now, O drowned one? What now, he who dwells beneath the waves? Your kraken is dead. Shall you summon more? He pauses briefly before snarling when he receives no response. Well, I'm waiting. But, nothing. Not a single thing. Except for the tug in his chest. The kraken's connection might be gone, but the drowned god's connection is not. Euron could flee, and under normal circumstances he would have by this point, but if he does, he knows his fate. The moment that he steps foot on a boat without the express intention of trying to kill Axel Baratheon, the drowned god will sink his ship and drag him back down to the watery depths one final time. It wasn't fair, it wasn't fucking fair. All his plans, all his ambitions, reduced to this. He could have braved Valyria without the drowned god's favor. He could have conquered the Iron Islands without needing a single ounce of that bastard god's power. He could have done so much more. But no. This was what he got. Euron Greyjoy had been turned into nothing but a plaything for a god, and he hadn't even been given the tools he needed to succeed at his task. Useless. Fucking useless piece of shit god. Euron rages, slamming his fist into the stone before him, cursing at the top of his lungs until he has no air left to waste on such things. And then he stands there, panting for breath and watching on as Axel Baratheon's fleets approach the Isle of Pike. They arrive within the hour, unloading onto the beaches. The men of Westeros come flooding out, roaring at the top of their lungs and charging forward for glory and honor and bloodshed. Euron watches on dispassionately as Ironborn die left and right. He's never truly cared about his people. He's never truly cared for anyone but himself. Axel Baratheon, of course, takes the field almost immediately, turning what was already a lopsided battle into a truly one-sided slaughter. What few defensive scorpions they have in place on Pike are targeted first by the Flying King, who rips them apart with his bare hands and a savage grin, allowing for his forces to advance up the beach and make quick work of the Ironborn down there all the faster. Soon enough, the castle itself is under siege, but the two lasts mere moments before Axel notices that his men have made it to the gate. At which point, he blasts it open with brute force, clearing the way for them to continue on. Only then, as the shouts and screams of fighting fill Castle Pike below Euron's feet, does the Baratheon king float up to him where he stands on the battlements. The Kraken's corpse looms over both of their heads as Axel looks up and smiles at the sight of the damn thing drooped upon Euron's castle. Did you like my gift? Euron twitches, backing up a few paces to put room between them as Axel comes in for a landing on the castle's stone ramparts. He holds his sword at his side, still coated in the blood of his little brother. The Baratheon king barely spares a glance towards Damfair's lifeless body though, even as he draws his own sword from his waist. The drowned god was right to fear you. You are no man, Axel Baratheon. You're something else entirely. That catches the king of Westeros off guard, though Euron knows there's no way to make use of the opening. For a moment, Axel looks surprised, then, his eyebrow quirks up mockingly. Oh, is this where you tell me that the drowned god made you do all of this? That you were merely following your deity's commandments all this time? The drowned priest dead at your feet makes it a little hard to believe that, if I'm being honest. Seems to me that you've had a bit of a falling out, even. Euron growls at being mocked by the younger man. Believe what you will. It is the truth. I was halfway across the world when the drowned god sunk my ship and pulled me into the depths. He forced this pact upon me. A pact that had one singular goal, your death. That causes Axel to narrow his eyes thoughtfully. Euron just lets out a bark of mirthless laughter and shakes his head. For a so-called god, he's just so weak. Even with our pact, he can't strike me down here for speaking my mind. He had to guide me to the horn in the ruins of old Valyria that allowed me to connect and command the Kraken. He calls himself a god, demands worship and submission, but in the end, he's just so impotent. The Baratheon king looks nonplussed by this conversation. Perhaps he expected Euron to curse him, rather than cursing his would-be god. But Euron had never been much of a believer. In fact, one day, I hope you kill him. I hope you find a way to wherever it is that a squirming worm like him hides and you slaughter him like you did the Kraken. Even if these are to be my final moments, I will take solace in that hope. Because he's not going to stop coming after you, Axel Baratheon. None of them are. That gets the king's attention. His gaze sharpens as he frowns more severely. They. Who is they? Euron laughs again, even as he takes his sword in both hands, holding it out before him, ready to fight. The gods, you slow bastard. You are the champion of the seven. They have laid claim to you, made you their own, and are using you to spread their will. Did you truly think the others would just let something like you continue to exist? Do you think the drowned god is the only deity moving against you even now? No, oh no, no. This might be the end for me, but it's only the beginning for you. Axel stares for another long moment before lifting his own sword wordlessly. Rather than launch himself forward, however, he pauses. Just one more questions before we begin. That armor you're wearing, is that Valyrian steel? Euron looks down at his armor, black scale mail with glyphs and arcane symbols somewhat covering up the all too familiar dark gray ripple patterns of the Valyrian steel it's made of. After a moment, he nods, taking a bit of pride in it as he holds his head high. Ah, it is. Axel smiles. My thanks then. I think it'll look better on me than it does on you. Then, the Baratheon king moves. Euron tries to bring up his sword to block, but it's no use. One moment he's lifting his arms, the next moment he has no arms. Or rather, he has no body. Euron has heard stories that men live on briefly after being decapitated. Unfortunately, he gets to experience this firsthand as his head is shorn from his shoulders, no doubt to keep his armor fully intact and undamaged. His line of sight is nothing but sky for a moment before his head lands on the deck and he winds up rolling to a stop right next to his dead brother's face. Euron only has to stare into Aaron's sightless eyes for a moment before Axel Baratheon's fingers curl in his black hair, however. For some reason, I thought you would be stronger. The drowned god claimed you, didn't he? If I'm the champion of the seven and you're supposed to be his champion, where is your power? Where is your personal strength? Well, no matter. He can have you back now. And if he is actually down there, feel free to tell him I really will come for him next if he keeps coming after me and mine. Wait, what? Euron's last moments of consciousness are of being whipped through the air as Axel flings him across the sky and into the sea. And then he hits the waves and knows nothing at all. Except that's not quite true. The bastard has sent him to his god, to the god who has laid claim on Euron's soul. When next his eyes open, it's to a familiar darkness as the depths of the drowned god's domains surround him. Only, this time he's not here to be persuaded into a pact. This time, he's here as a failure, a dead man, claimed by whatever manner of creature he who dwells beneath the waves truly is. Euron tries to scream. He most definitely tries. XXX. Axel whistles quietly to himself as he watches Euron's head fly off into the distance before hitting the water. Then, he glances up at the massive kraken corpse still half-draped over Castle Pike and grins. That grin only widens when he looks down at Euron's decapitated corpse, clad in Valyrian steel armor. But then the grin fades and Axel finds himself reflecting on the Greyjoy's last words. They had been both illuminating and frustrating in equal measure, ultimately. Actually, Euron Greyjoy had left him with more questions than answers. All of this was because the drowned god wanted him dead. Because the Seven had claimed him as their champion. But had they been the ones to bless him and protect him all his life or not? Had they empowered him or were they simply taking advantage of his strength and his faith? More than that though, the Seven were on his side, supposedly. But what about other gods? Would they really come after him like Euron claimed? The old gods hadn't yet, as far as he could tell. The north, where most of their remaining worshippers resided, had been nothing but steadfast and loyal. And Axel couldn't possibly imagine someone like Lord Stark being capable of subterfuge. If the old gods did whisper anything in his ear about Axel being an abomination to put down, the man would have said something outright rather than plotting against him in the shadows. Yet, Axel didn't think either possibility was really happening. On the other hand, Varys did mention something about Daenerys Targaryen being accompanied by a red priestess, didn't he? And also something about her teaching the Targaryen princess blood and fire magic that allowed her to hatch dragons by sacrificing her own brother. Could that be something? Or was he simply jumping at shadows? At that thought, Axel shakes his head, clearing it and letting out a laugh. Here he was, completely victorious, and he was letting a dead man's final words get to him. In the end, Euron Greyjoy had just been a madman who thought his pet kraken would allow him to conquer all of Westeros. Nothing more. It really was as simple as that, wasn't it? And, Euron had been wrong too. Dead wrong, hey. Looking up again to the kraken's corpse and then back down over the parapets to where Pike is being casually conquered in good order, Axel grins once more. The rest of the Iron Islands would fall within days to be sure. And then Axel would finally have to decide just how he was going to handle this collection of worthless fucking rocks. But that's perfectly fine. The time for hiding and hesitation is over. From now on, Axel Baratheon is not going to pretend to be anything less than what he truly is. Not anymore. XXX. Euron dies screaming. Axel gets a new set of armor. And like he told Asha, the fighting was easy. It's what comes next that will be harder. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 70. Cleanup. Cleaning up the Iron Islands. XXX. By the time all is said and done, the battle's over with and the Ironborn subjugated across every stinking rock in their little island chain. The Iron Islands are a complete and utter mess. This, Axel Baratheon decides, is not necessarily a bad thing. Nor was it entirely unexpected either. The Iron Islands needed a change. The Ironborn needed a change. And there wasn't going to be a better time to help things along than right now, all things considered. Thanks to his Kraken, Euron Greyjoy didn't just have popular support among the Ironborn, he'd had damn near unanimous support. That means Axel doesn't have to play nice. Each and every Ironborn noble who survived this pissing contest of a war is a traitor to the Seven Kingdoms. Not that many did survive anyways. The war might have been swift, with just 2 major battles at sea and on land if one was counting the sacking of Lannisport and the siege of Castle Rock. However, because of the way their culture worked, Ironborn nobles were almost universally also Ironborn captains. When Axel had single-handedly wiped out more than half of Euron Greyjoy's fleet at sea, he'd also wiped out most of the Ironborn nobility in the process. And since many of them had their sons serving under them or captaining their own boats, he'd actually wiped out entire noble houses in some cases. On top of that, the Ironborn did not like to surrender, even when faced with an unbeatable foe apparently. Oh, there had been some who had broken from the sight of Euron's Kraken impaled on Castle Pike's tallest tower. Especially when the subsequent invasion force stormed their fortifications in mere minutes with Axel's assistance. However, most had fought to the death, and in doing so cleared out even more of the problem for him. This ultimately left Axel with a couple thousand men who could claim to be true Ironborn, in the face of what had once been tens of thousands. And far less could be said to have ever captained a ship or led an Ironborn house. The bodies from his sinking of so much of their fleet were already said to be washing up on the shores of Pike and other nearby islands, and likely would be for quite a long time to come. And so Axel comes to find himself holding court from the seastone chair, an immense block of oily black stone carved into the shape of a kraken. He sits upon it like the conqueror he is and judges the men brought before him one by one. Most face the headman's block. Some are allowed to go to the wall to take the black. None escape without some sort of punishment though. Until eventually, Axel finds himself before an assembled mass of men. Some of them, a very scant few, are Ironborn. But most are his people, crowding the hall and surrounding said Ironborn survivors on all sides. Some of those people are from the mountain clans of the Vale that he's brought with him, specifically the Moon Brothers and the Milk Snakes. They've already been gifted some of the emptied-out lands here in the Iron Islands after signaling that they wanted to stick around and try their hands at fishing and sailing. Axel wasn't sure if they were going to be able to make something of their new islands. But in the end, that was up to them. Whether the Moon Brothers and the Milk Snakes could actually prosper here on the Iron Islands or not was entirely in their own hands at this point, though Axel of course wished the 2 clans the best of luck all the same. Everyone, whether they're his men or not, looks to him with either reverence or fear in their eyes though. There's pockets of disbelief here and there, as though they cannot trust what their own eyes saw, but Axel doesn't really care. He knows they're too afraid to try anything. Finally rising from the seastone chair, he stands before them all, towering over them as his eyes sweep across the room. He considers floating for a moment for added effect and can even feel how easy it would be to let himself do so, but no, for the moment he stays on the ground. Now that all individual punishments have been handed out, I have a number of decrees to make. It has been a long time since the Ironborn followed the old ways. 300 years have passed since Aegon the Conqueror killed Harrenhal at the burning of Harrenhal and ended your ancient traditions of reaving and plundering. There's some shifting from foot to foot at that. Some scowling too, from the few Ironborn in the castle. But they hold their tongues all the same, knowing better than to speak right now. Axel pins them with his gaze all the same, staring them each down until they look away. And yet, Aegon didn't go far enough, did he? For all that the histories claim you lot became more civilized after his conquest, the truth is, you're still trying to go back. 300 years and you're still trying to bring back the old ways. Still talking about us, Greenlanders, and how we're weak, for not paying the iron price for our survival. Axel lets a smile creep across his face. He takes a purposefully menacing step forward and is amused when every Ironborn arrayed in front of him takes a step back. He scoffs at them derisively before asking a question. Am I weak? I, Axel Baratheon, first of his name, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms. Am I weak? His roar shakes the castle walls for a moment before things quiet back down. Nobody dares to question him. Feel free to step forward and challenge me. Many of your kin have died by my hand at this point, after all. Including your so-called king. Euron Greyjoy, king of the Iron Islands, bringer of the old ways. And for what? To get the lot of you killed. To lead you to ruin just like his brother Balon before him. Axel spits on the floor to show how he feels about both men. Out of the corner of his eye, he sees Theon bristle. Asha is silent. Thoughtful. When he meets her gaze, he gives her a meaningful look and a single arched eyebrow. In response, she just nods to him. Very well then, if that's what she wants. The first of my decrees is simple. The practice of thraldom ends today. There will never be another thrall on the Iron Islands for as long as I live. That causes far more of a stir among the Ironborn in the hall. And yet, still none of them are willing to speak up. Funny how war works. When all is said and done, all that are left behind are the cowards. There are men who will try to tell me that a thrall is not a slave. That a thrall is no man's property. I disagree. Again, his raised voice causes the stone walls to shake. Axel sneers at the Ironborn, snarling as he glares them all down. There is no place for slavery in my 7 kingdoms. And therefore, there is no place for thralls either. A cheer starts up at that. Not from the Ironborn of course, but from his own men. Men of Westeros, men of honor, men who despise slavery just as much as Axel does. For 300 years, the Targaryens allowed the Ironborn to get away with their own personal form of slavery in all but name. His father did too, despite putting down Balon Greyjoy's rebellion. No more. For as long as Axel lived, no more. As well. Which brings me to my second decree. The taking of salt wives is over, effectively immediately. That does it. Finally, one of the silent Ironborn breaks rank. What? You can't. Axel blurs across the hall faster than most eyes can track, coming to a stop in front of the man who dared to speak up. His hand grips the Ironborn's shoulder as his sudden appearance mere inches from the warrior's face causes the words to catch on his tongue as he stares, wide-eyed and fearful. The king's voice, when it comes, is soft as silk yet nevertheless echoes through the otherwise silent hall, reaching the ears of every man and woman standing around him. You don't know the half of what I can and can't do. Do you think you've seen the depth of my power? Do you think your would-be king and his pet were enough to even make me break a sweat? When the Ironborn just trembles in Axel's grasp, the king smiles. Go on. Try me. I see the dagger you smuggled in here under your shirt. Draw it. Stab me through. I give you permission. For a second, he really believes the man will try for it. He is Ironborn after all. But in the end, cowardice wins out and he stays frozen in terror. Axel scoffs and pushes him back forcibly after a moment, into the arms of loyal knights who will see him imprisoned for daring to smuggle a weapon into this meeting. For that crime, they will probably have yet another Ironborn man on his way to the wall soon enough. Turning back to the rest, Axel just shrugs, smirking. As I was saying, there will be no further salt wives. No further blood sacrifices to the drowned god either. He was tempted to outlaw worship of the drowned god altogether. Especially after his conversation with Euron. But in the end, Axel had decided there were limits to what even he could get away with this early, especially given what he was planning on doing next. If he really wanted to leave the drowned god with no worshippers this side of Westeros, then he would end life on the Iron Islands entirely, killing the rest of the Ironborn and transporting everyone else such as the thralls and salt wives back to the mainland where they might return to their families or find new lives. But, no. While he would still be making sure that any former thralls or salt wives who wanted to return to their families were allowed to do so, he was also trying to make an effort to leave some semblance of civilization on these god-forsaken islands intact. Why? Because Asha wanted them. And he had always been a sucker for a pretty face. Ah. But it's not all bad news, my good sirs. Axel claps his hands together with a wide, toothy grin stretching from ear to ear as he makes his way back to the seastone chair and sits back down upon it. Again, his sheer size allows him to dominate the pitch-black chair like the conqueror he is. House Greyjoy has served as the lords of the Iron Islands for generations. And while Euron, Victarion, and Aeron Greyjoy all turned out to be traitors, Balon Greyjoy's last 2 remaining children remained loyal to their king, as well as the Iron Throne. Theon pushes his way forward at that, looking expectant and eager. But Axel shuts him down with a raised hand. Truthfully, he doesn't necessarily want to ruin the other man's day like this. But at the same time, if Theon really thought Axel was just going to give this to him, he hadn't been paying attention. On one hand, we have Balon Greyjoy's last surviving son, who has in turn been raised in Winterfell as a ward to Lord Eddard Stark since the age of 10. There's a flinch from Theon at that, even as murmuring breaks out among the assembled Ironborn in the hall. It's not exactly positive murmuring, from what Axel can tell. Still, he just smiles widely, pretending not to notice. Lord Stark is one of the most honorable men I know. And the North does not breed weakness. I'm confident that Theon Greyjoy has learned quite a lot of valuable lessons in the North, and that he will be a loyal subject to the Iron Throne for as long as he lives. Those words have Theon puffing up his chest in pride, making it clear that the man still had no idea how to read the room. Axel's words might mean something to the knights and lords that he's brought with him from the mainland, but to the few remaining Ironborn. They're already judging Theon harshly. Already looking down on him for his weakness, albeit silently. Letting his smile morph into a grin, Axel gestures with his other hand. On the other hand, we have Balon's only daughter. Asha Greyjoy, a captain in her own right who has grown up here among you and has been sailing her own ship for a decade now. She came to King's Landing at her father's request, to investigate rumors of Euron's insidious plotting. Of all of you, she is the only Ironborn captain to keep her crew loyal to their king. She was smart enough to choose the winning side. But she's a woman. The outraged outburst doesn't come from one of the Ironborn in the hall. Or rather, not one of the ones who Axel is currently speaking to. Instead, it's Theon Greyjoy who points out that rather obvious fact, incredulous and frustrated as he gestures to Asha. Asha, who has stepped forward by this point wordlessly, presenting herself for all to see. Head held high, chin jutting out, she glares at everyone assembled, but she glares at her brother most of all. Axel just grins wider. Yes, she is a woman, isn't she? A female captain among the Ironborn is rare, but not entirely unheard of. A Lady Reaper of Pike though, now that's never been done before, has it? Theon looks gobsmacked. The other Ironborn look uncomfortable. Axel once again rises from the seastone chair, crossing his arms over his broad chest as he looks down at all of them. His sneer transforms into a wicked grin after a moment of silence. We're going to do something that you lot should have done when Euron first snuck back here to kill his brother and usurp this stupid throne. We're going to have a kingsmoot. Shock ripples through the hall at that proclamation. But of course, Axel isn't done. Of course, the only candidates allowed to make their cases will be Theon and Asha Greyjoy. And it won't just be the captains who get a vote. Every last living soul who still calls the Iron Islands home and intends to stay here after I'm gone will be allowed to vote in this kingsmoot. Including former thralls and salt wives. Ironborn men bristle indignantly at this, and yet, none make a move to try and take a stand after the last example. Axel just chuckles at their impotent anger. And yes, I'm well aware that I'm perverting your traditions while at the same time tearing them down. In case it wasn't obvious, that was the point. And in case you lot needed another lesson. Axel finally gives into the urge and flies. Specifically, he flies straight up through the stone above his head, breaking right through it and coming out into the open sky above the castle. It takes only a moment of his time to find what he's looking for, and once he's extracted it, he flies back down through the hole in the ceiling that he's made. Everyone barely has a chance to react to his departure. The falling stones from his ascent only just manage to beat him back to the ground before he arrives among them again, holding his grisly prize aloft in one hand. Contemptuously, Axel tosses the glossy orb, bigger than his head, to the floor at the feet of the assembled Ironborn. He smiles as they slowly realize what they're looking at, one of the eyeballs of the massive kraken corpse that even now lays draped over Castle Pike. It's a solid reminder of just how powerful Axel truly is. Bringing his hands together in a loud clap that rattles the castle's walls, Axel draws their attention back to him. Right then. Get to work. They scurry to do his bidding, and Axel spares one last look to Asha in the process. He won't just hand the position to her, but they both know he's stacked the deck in her favor all the same. Her only competition is her soft brother, after all. If she can't win against Theon, then she doesn't deserve to be the first Lady Reaper of Pike, plain and simple. But in the end, they both know how this is going to go. XXX. And there you have it. Axel definitely isn't taking it easy on the Ironborn, but because of Asha's ambitions he doesn't go full scorched earth like he could have. He really is a sucker for a sexy bitch who can fight. 4 comments 0 vote. Chapter 71. Conquered. Meet the new ruler of the Iron Islands. XXX. Days after Axel Baratheon's decrees, Asha Greyjoy stands in the Great Hall of Castle Pike, staring at the eerily black seastone chair. The Kingsmoot had just finished and, she's done it. She's been named ruler of the Iron Islands. The first woman to ever hold the title. The First Lady Reaper of Pike. It had been a bit closer than she expected it to be too, in no small part because of how the king had decided to pervert and corrupt their ancient traditions for his own ends. The Kingsmoot in antiquity was only ever supposed to be made up of ironborn captains, for it was said that each captain was a king on his own ship. Only once the vast majority of those assembled captains called out a candidate's name without fail would the Kingsmoot come to a close. But of course, it was just as Axel had said. He wasn't going to let her people off easily. Nor was he going to suffer another attempt to return to the old ways in another 15 or 20 years when the next generation grew up and tried to follow in their forefathers' footsteps. And so he'd done away with thraldom and salt wives. Then, he'd gone a step further by giving every single man and woman on the Iron Islands a voice. Be they captains, sailors, or those laborers who had no choice but to serve until now, everyone got to have a say. Even those mountain warriors he'd brought with him from the Vale who had decided they were settling on the Iron Islands got a say. As a result of this, there were quite a lot of individuals on the Iron Islands who had been born on the mainland and didn't really care that Theon Greyjoy had been raised in the far-off stronghold of Winterfell by House Stark. They didn't care that he'd barely sailed a day in his life, or that it had been over a decade since he'd seen his homeland. If anything, for some of them that was a positive rather than a negative. Asha, meanwhile, had the support of every remaining Ironborn captain and sailor right off the bat, because even if she was a woman, at least she was one of them. However, because of just how many Ironborn had died foolishly following Euron Greyjoy to his watery grave, those weren't the overwhelming numbers they should have been in the ensuing Kingsmoot. Yet funnily enough, that was actually why Asha had won, in the end. She'd taken a look at the landscape and spent the scant days leading up to the actual vote reaching out to people beyond her fellow Ironborn. She'd held meetings with prominent former thralls and the former salt wives of now dead Ironborn lords and listened to what they had to say, lending them her ear. Meanwhile, her foolish brother Theon had made the mistake of going after the remaining Ironborn who were already going to vote for her, to try and peel them away. He'd spent his time chasing the votes he was never going to get in the first place and ignoring the former thralls and salt wives who could have put him on the seastone chair. Even then, when all was said and done, it had been rather close. The first few shouts of the assembled masses at the Kingsmoot had been rather mixed and it was impossible to tell who would win. But eventually, the tide had turned, and Asha's name had started to sprout from more and more lips, until her brother's name faded to but a whisper beside it. And so now here she was. Lady of the Iron Islands. Congratulations, Lady Greyjoy. Asha whips around, not too surprised that Axel managed to sneak up on her but still caught off guard by his sudden presence. Then again, she'd been caught off guard by a lot of what she'd seen during the battles against her uncle. She understood now where Axel's confidence had stemmed from. As well as that strange remark about how she would have broken her hand if he'd let her punch him back in his tent. His skin, his flesh, it must be impossibly tough for him to go toe-to-toe with that kraken as he did. Not to mention his strength. All anyone could talk about was the fact that he could fly and fly fast at that. But Asha was far more focused on just how strong Axel had to be to lift that massive carcass out of the water like he did, and then fling it so far that it landed here atop her family's castle, hundreds of miles away. It all just seemed so impossible. But as they said, seeing was believing. Even still. Bastard. Axel grins, taking the curse good-naturedly, despite his origins. How has Theon taken the news? Do you think he'll be a problem? Shall I kill him for you? Asha huffs, rolling her eyes at that but ultimately shaking her head. He's fine. I think it being somewhat close actually mollified him a bit. He would have been far more upset if he'd lost by a landslide, I imagine. Still, I spoke with him. I told him that he could take an officer's position on my old ship, which I'll be letting my first mate captain in my stead while I'm busy with my new duties here. Whether Theon can make something of himself or not and earn the respect of our people from there, that will be up to him. Of course, left unsaid is that if Theon proves incapable of changing or becoming more than he is now, there might just be an accident at sea. Silence falls as Axel contemplates her words for a long moment before finally nodding. Then, He tilts his head to the side, smiling at her more softly. I did warn you, Asha. And I even asked if you wanted this. I almost wish you had lost, if only so I could whisk you away back to King's Landing and keep you as my woman for the rest of your days. Maybe once Lord Seaworth got a little older, I'd have had you shadow him and him mentor you until he retired and you'd have become my mistress of ships. Flushing, Asha finds herself imagining it for a moment. Fuck, it sounded nice too. She almost wishes that could have been what happened as well. And yet, she knew deep down inside that this was where she belonged. I'm needed here. My people need me here. Stalking forward, the king snorts derisively as he looks down at her. Your people are pirate scum, Asha. She flinches but ultimately stands her ground, straightening up and jutting out her chin even as Axel comes to a stop looming over her. They can be more than that. The Ironborn can be more than that. Asha already has plans, actually. Oh, she has such plans. Of course, it'll be an uphill battle every step of the way, but for all that Axel has made things harder for her, he's also made things easier for her as well. The king, who can fly and kills massive sea monsters without breaking a sweat, has set forth his decrees. Decrees that Asha herself didn't even necessarily disagree with. But they were his decrees, not hers. And nobody who had seen what he could do would dare move against his words. Especially since all of the most ornery bastards among the Ironborn were dead at this point. Those that were left, Asha was confident she could control. And if all went according to plan, then the Iron Islands would change. She would change them, in her image. Axel just smiles sadly, as if mourning what could have been as he reaches up and brushes his knuckles across her cheek. I hope you're right, Asha. Before he can pull away however, Asha snaps up her hand and grabs him at the thinnest post of his wrist. It's the only part of his arm she can wrap her fingers most of the way around. They look at one another for a moment, and then the new lady of the Iron Islands all but lunges forward, wrapping her other arm around Axel's neck and hoisting herself up onto her tiptoes so she can kiss him deeply. He responds by placing his hands at her waist after a moment. Asha kisses Axel Baratheon as hard as she dares, and he kisses her back, their tongues intertwining in seconds. Eventually though, she begins to pull on him, walking herself backwards. She's actually looking for it now, which is how Asha can tell that Axel is humoring her entirely. If he didn't want to move, he wouldn't. If he didn't want to let her pull on him, she would get nowhere, like trying to tug on a massive stone statue. But he goes along with her all the same, until eventually they reach their destination and Asha carefully turns them both around before pushing him down to sit upon her new throne. Axel's massive frame honestly dwarfs the seastone chair. The Greyjoy throne, carved into the shape of a kraken, has an almost oily quality to it and has long been rumored to cause spine-hardening nightmares in those who sit upon it. But when Axel sits in it, it's almost like he's dominating it with his body, making the seastone chair an utter joke as it labors beneath him to try to contain his broad frame. Seeing the way his mere presence seems to make a mockery of her people's most ancient relic probably shouldn't turn Asha on so damn much, but it fucking does. Standing before him, Asha wastes no time in hastily reaching down and pulling at her pants as fast as she can. As soon as she has them off and not a moment later, Asha climbs into Axel's lap while also reaching for his own crotch, eager to fish out his cock. His hands, meanwhile, go to her top, pulling and tugging at it too. By the time she has his cock out, he has her top off and her breasts, far smaller than those of the women waiting for him back home, in his grasp. Asha nevertheless moans as he begins to fondle her tits and suck at her nipples. At the same time though, she fucking needs him inside of her, so that's what she does, pulling herself up and then dropping herself down and impaling herself on Axel Baratheon's massive fucking cock. If her forefathers could see her now, they would be appalled. Not just because a woman dared to claim leadership of the Ironborn, but because she then proceeded to submit, wholly and utterly, to the king who had all but put her on her throne. And now here she was, bouncing up and down on Axel's cock while he sat upon the seastone chair. This right here was the physical embodiment of Axel's conquest of the Iron Islands. In this moment, Asha represents her people's surrender, their submission. She should be angered by that fact. She should be furious. Instead, she feels amazing. Tossing her head back, Asha lets out a lewd cry as she clenches down upon Axel's cock, climaxing from just a few thrusts. But of course, he doesn't stop there. Not even as she gets more sensitive from that initial orgasm. Not even as she whimpers and quivers atop him. No, Axel Baratheon doesn't know the meaning of slowing down and Asha is too prideful to ask for a chance to her recover. So instead she takes it. She takes his big, fat cock again and again and she marvels at just how good he makes her feel. And then, a stray thought hits her. She's going to miss him when he's gone. But, how is she ever supposed to live without this? It's like a jolt of lightning through her body even as Asha screams and arches her back from yet another explosive orgasm in just a few minutes while clenching down around his throbbing shaft. This is it. He's going to be leaving soon, returning to King's Landing where his other women await him. And Asha will be stuck here, all alone, bereft of his company. Now don't get her wrong, Asha Greyjoy, Lady Reaper of Pike, ruler of the Ironborn, needs no man. But Axel is not a man at all. He's something else entirely, he's a force of fucking nature. Emphasis on the fucking. Lurching forward, Asha wraps her arms around Axel's shoulders and buries her face in the crook of his neck. She knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that no other man can ever compare to him. Truthfully, she doesn't even want to try to fill the void his absence will create. But what is she to do? Her place is here, making something worthy of her people. And he is the king, far away in King's Landing. So far away that there's no way he would visit regularly just for her. No, she needs to give him another reason to visit the Iron Islands. Another reason to visit what she knew he thought of as nothing but a misbegotten, barren pile of rocks in the ocean. She needed a child. His child. The inspiration hits her like a smack to the face and before she can second guess herself, she's pulling her head back to look Axel right in the eye, even as she grinds her cunt down onto his massive cock. Come inside of me, Axel. Fill me with your seed, and breed me. Never mind her previous thoughts about detesting the very idea of being a mother. She would do it if it meant giving Axel Baratheon a reason to visit her. She would let him come inside of her womb again and again, filling her up until she was fit to burst if it meant she could lure him back for future visits. Axel though, slows a bit. He looks at her quietly for a long moment. I'm not sure I can do that, Asha. Letting an Ironborn have a claim to the Iron Throne, nasty business. Asha flushes and scowls. Gritting her teeth, she reaches down and grabs the front of Axel's top, pressing her forehead against his and staring him in the eye. She keeps sliding up and down his cock completely of her own power since he's stopped moving quite as much. Then make sure the brat isn't an Ironborn. He furrows his brow, forcing Asha to elaborate. You can bloody fly, can't you? Faster even than a raven. That means you can visit. Knock me up and boy or girl, once the child is born, you can come from time to help me raise it. You decide what thoughts get put in its head. And if you want, when it's a little older, say 5 or so, you can take it back to King's Landing and raise it there alongside your other children. Not as an Ironborn, but as one of your kind. By the time the first is 5, Asha can have extracted more of his seed and given him more children, forcing him to continue his visits to the Iron Islands. She'll keep him coming back for more no matter what it takes, so long as he doesn't abandon her, nor forget about her. From the surprised look on Axel's face, he clearly hadn't thought of that. For a moment, Asha wonders if she's going to have to debase herself further. She's even willing to beg, if she has to. But then, his hands fall upon her hips and his eyes flash. She knows she has his interest. That doesn't mean he's just going to agree though. No child I have with you can ever sit upon the Iron Throne. Do you understand that, Asha Greyjoy? I'll have it put in writing, if my seed takes within your womb. They can inherit whatever you build here, but nothing nowhere else. That's the only way this can ever work. Asha swallows thickly and nods her agreement. Truth be told, she wouldn't have it any other way. A moment later, her eyes widen as Axel truly begins to fuck her from below. She nearly bites through her own tongue as he slams her down onto his cock, before finally her mouth falls open and her eyes roll back in her skull. What follows, is everything Asha Greyjoy, Lady Reaper of Pike, could have wanted. Axel fucks her long and hard, using her as nothing but a toy for his pleasures. And in the end, he comes inside of her, filling her with his seed. Of course, whether he actually manages to impregnate her or not on that first go remains to be seen. Even as she feels unbelievably slick down betwixt her thighs, Asha leans forward and plants uncharacteristically soft kisses upon the corner of Axel's mouth. She's never felt more like a woman, truth be told. And for the first time in her life, that doesn't seem like such a bad thing. You'll have to make time to visit me in the next month or so, just in case your seed doesn't take before you depart. Axel grunts, but that's not good enough for her needs. She looks him dead in the eye, grinding her cunt down upon his rock-hard cock. Please. Promise me. He looks back at her for a long moment, before nodding. All right. I promise. Ash's smile is bright enough to light up the room, even as she shudders in delight before slowly starting to ride him again. After all, if he wasn't going to go soft, they might as well go for another round. XXX. Tomboy pirate queen begging to be bred too tempting for our boy to resist. Luckily she ain't planning anything more nefarious than how to best get more of that alien DLMFAO. 5 comments 0 vote. Chapter 72. Master of Coin. Axel is getting rather tired of the Iron Islands. Imagine his surprise when someone comes over from the mainland just to talk to him. XXX. His words to Asha about what came after Euron's defeat being far more complex than the defeat itself had turned out to be downright prophetic. After all, killing Euron and his Kraken and then conquering the Iron Islands had taken less than a day. But the rest of it, from making sure his edicts were being followed to hosting the Kingsmoot to helping Asha deal with any particularly stubborn holdouts, it was all bringing his stay on the Isle of Pike up on 2 weeks now. Axel wished he didn't care as much as he did, because he would have left by now otherwise. Alas, here he was, nearly 2 weeks later, still helping Asha settle into her new rule. To be fair, it wouldn't be much longer. Just a couple more days and the last of Axel's boats would be departing from the Iron Islands and returning to Westeros. And there was only one more thing he really wanted to do before he departed himself, aside from a long and protracted goodbye, with Asha, that is. Yes, Axel Baratheon was very much ready to leave the Iron Islands behind for the foreseeable future until the next time he visited Asha. Which is why he was so surprised when he was informed that he had a visitor who had just come in on the latest ship from the mainland. Tyrion Lannister. You've certainly come a long way to beg an audience with me. Being informed of the Lannister imp's arrival and his request to see him had honestly thrown Axel for a loop, until he realized he shouldn't have been all that surprised. The last time they'd spoke, Tyrion had made it clear that his father sent him to try and see if he could weasel his way into one of the vacancies on Axel's small council. Specifically, the position of Master of Coin. Axel, in turn, had made up an excuse on the spot about how it would be a conflict of interest to have a member of House Lannister in the position when the crown still owed a considerable sum of gold, nearly 1 million golden dragons in fact, to the Lannisters. In reality, he just didn't want Tywin Lannister to have any sort of power or influence in King's Landing. The man had gotten on Axel's bad side with his actions during Renly's rebellion, and his daughter had left a mixed impression on him. On the one hand, Cersei Lannister had been a rather enjoyable lover. On the other hand, she'd tried to poison him all throughout his life and then had a mental breakdown and attempted to assassinate him with her own 2 hands after the trial by the Seven. Yes, mixed was the right word for it. Regardless, he'd told Tyrion that the only way he would even consider the dwarf for the position of Master of Coin was if House Lannister was willing to forgive the rest of the crown's debt. This was something Axel had been confident that Tywin Lannister would ultimately never accept. In fact, he'd been so confident that despite telling Tyrion he would give them until he was back with Euron's head to come to a decision, Axel hadn't actually had any intentions of returning to the mainland via the Westerlands. At least, not overland anyways. Instead, he was planning to fly back to King's Landing without stopping anywhere along the way unless he absolutely had to. He was looking forward to it, in fact. Yet here Tyrion was all the same. Somehow, Axel doubted that the imp had come all this way to deliver a rejection to his offer. Then again, given Tywin's purported hatred for his deformed son, maybe he shouldn't put something like that past the old lion. Bowing low at the waist, Tyrion Lannister holds the position for a long moment. I have indeed, Your Grace. And I greatly appreciate you allowing me to make my case. Raising an eyebrow, Axel tilts his head to the side in bemused amusement. Is that what I'm doing? Tyrion lifts his head, looking a little nervous. No, scratch that. The imp looks very nervous. Even more nervous than he'd been back outside of the ruins of Lannisport when they'd first spoken in the War Council tent. Word of his exploits had no doubt already reached Castle Rock, hadn't they? Honestly, his newest feats were probably harder to believe than his previous ones. Surviving wildfire for 7 days and 7 nights. Ridiculous, but one could perhaps lean on one's belief in the Seven to explain it away. But killing a Kraken single-handedly. Flying through the air and sinking half of the Ironborn fleet by himself. It was all patently insane, and yet there were tens of thousands of men who had seen it happen. And they would all be telling the exact same story. On top of that, Axel had no intentions of hiding his true self anymore. So eventually, the inhabitants of King's Landing would see him fly as well. It was going to become a fact of life soon enough. The sky is blue, water is wet, and the king can fly. For now though, Tyrion seems to believe the tales and that's given him a healthy fear of Axel, as well it should have. But at the same time, Axel holds no particularly deep dislike for the dwarf. If anything, he enjoyed the imp's sense of humor the first time they spoke. With a sigh, Axel waves his hand. Go on then. Make your case, Tyrion Lannister. Thank you, my king. I have a letter signed and sealed by my father here. If you are willing to name me as your master of coin, then he will forgive the rest of the crown's debt to our house effective immediately. Axel blinks as Tyrion produces the letter and totters over on his stubby legs to hold it out. For a long moment, the king remains still, before finally taking it and cracking it open. The seal does indeed look genuine, given the number of Tywin's letters Axel had been subjected to during Renly's rebellion. And the contents, it's just as Tyrion said. Tywin Lannister is indeed giving Axel exactly what he asked for. He's accepting the insane deal that Axel made up at the spur of the moment. Why? Surely 1,000,000 golden dragons in debt was worth more than one small council seat, right? Or, was it? Fuck, now Axel was missing Jon. For all that he knew the man wasn't perfect, this was the kind of thing Jon would have been made for. The kind of thing he would have hopefully seen through and been able to explain to Axel. What was Tywin hoping to gain from this? More influence in King's Landing, obviously. More influence on the small council, of course. But, 1,000,000 golden dragons worth of influence. Axel's jaw clenches and his nostrils flare as he decides to be brutally honest with the dwarf in front of him. I will confess I do not understand your father's game here, Tyrion. That he so easily agreed to my demand just makes me more suspicious and less inclined to accept this deal. XXX. Tyrion grimaces at the king's blunt assessment of things. It was clear that Axel knew just enough to know that Tywin was trying to fuck him over in some way. It's tempting to do and say nothing and let Axel reject the offer and send him packing back to Castle Rock. But Tywin's words echo in Tyrion's head as he stands there across from the king. You will never be my heir. You will never inherit Castle Rock. Even if Cersei doesn't give birth to a son, I would sooner name Lancel as my heir than allow you to become Lord of House Lannister. Do I make myself clear? What was there left for him in Castle Rock? He certainly didn't want to stick around to be close to his only remaining sibling. Cersei was, no, best not to go there, not even in the privacy of his own thoughts. Sure, he could return to his father a failure and then try to go traveling again. Maybe make his way back to Aldtown and spend his days between whoring, drinking, and reading books at the Citadel. Except, Tyrion suspects that this failure would be one failure too many. The king is right, Tywin's willingness to forgive 1,000,000 golden dragons of debt is a testament to how badly he wants this deal to go through. If Tyrion can't make this work, then it's possible Tywin will finally wash his hands of him completely, maybe even disown him. No more allowance, no more Lannister name to protect him, nothing but the clothes on his back. He needs this deal badly, Tyrion realizes. Not for his house, but for his own sake. So maybe it's time to go about things in his own way. You're right, Your Grace. It is suspicious. But when you take a moment to look at it from my father's point of view, it begins to make more sense. Axel raises a brow, before wordlessly gesturing for Tyrion to continue. The one thing that my father has wanted for longer than I've been alive is to see his blood seated upon the Iron Throne. If not for the accident, it would have been Joffrey Baratheon, his grandson. But we both know how that turned out. And then my sister made an utter fool of herself, not only getting herself expelled from King's Landing in the process but also seeing my niece Myrcella sent off to Storm's End, as far from my father's control as possible. The king is still listening, Tyrion notes. In fact, it's a little intimidating how focused he is on every word that falls from Tyrion's lips. My father's influence over King's Landing and your court has been greatly diminished. And you've already proven just how ruthless you'll be when it comes to clearing out the crown's debts. Over the next few years, you will no doubt make it a point to clear out the debt to House Lannister first and foremost. Try weeks or months, actually. Tyrion stops at that, his mouth dry as he stares at Axel in confusion. The king grins wickedly in response. Since we're being so honest with one another, Euron Greyjoy managed to complete a successful voyage to Old Valyria. It's where he got the magical horn that allowed him to summon and control his kraken. His mouth hangs open as Axel just drops that on him. But the king is far from done. He also brought back a ship's hold worth of Valyrian steel as well. Valyrian steel swords, Valyrian steel daggers, even a set of Valyrian steel armor. Not to mention the jewelry and the cutlery. I've claimed it all for myself, of course. I intend to sell off what I need to in order to get the golden dragons to pay down the crown's debts, not just to your family but also to every last one of our creditors. The rest, I'll give to loyal subjects and those who prove themselves worthy of it. An entire ship's hold of Valyrian steel. That was insane. More than that though. You must know how long my father has been trying to secure a Valyrian steel sword for our house, your grace. You could sell just one of those Valyrian steel swords to him and he would not only forgive the debt, but also pay 1 or 2 million more golden dragons in the process. You won't find a better deal in all of Westeros. Axel chuckles and shakes his head at that. I know. And yet I'm not going to. I don't like your father very much, Tyrion, in case it wasn't obvious by this point. Tyrion licks his lips, suddenly feeling a cold sweat down his back. He'd been afraid of Axel from the moment he stepped in, having heard too many tales of what the man was capable of to be able to discount any of them as untrue. And most telling of all, when Tywin had heard the latest rumors, he'd sent Tyrion here as soon as possible, meaning that even the old lion believed the things they were saying about Axel Baratheon these days. Apparently, the king flew now. And he didn't just fly either. He also pulled Kraken corpses too heavy for 1,000 men to lift straight out of the water, only to fling them atop Castle Pike. Needless to say, Tyrion was treading very carefully right now. But this was more than that. That much Valyrian steel was going to settle the crown's debts and refill the coffers all at once. Why would you tell me that, your grace? Axel smiles, his eyes glittering as he looks down at Tyrion. I'll answer your question with a question of my own. Why would you be so honest about your father's thinking with me? You all but laid out that his plan is to give up the short-term benefit provided by the debt in order to get more long-term benefit out of having you, his son, on my small council. The king was scarily quick on the uptake sometimes. Tyrion swallows thickly, but in the end, the dwarf finds that once the words start spilling out, they don't stop. Because I don't like my father very much either, your grace. I despise Tywin Lannister. No, I hate him, in fact. I hate my entire family at this point. The only men who were worthy of the Lannister name, my brother and uncles, are dead now. My father has made it clear that I am never going to inherit whether he still draws breath or not. I need a way out. I need an escape. For a long moment, Axel just stares at him. Finally, the king tilts his head to the side. Your first loyalty would be to me, not your father nor your house. Tywin would never accept that, but Tyrion found he didn't much care anymore. His father could eat shit. House Lannister could go and die out for all he cared. Of course, your grace. I won't ask you to publicly denounce your family unless they make it necessary, but I will expect you to tell me everything your father asks of you. And if I tell you to lie to him, you will obey. Tyrion chances his own grin at that. It would be my pleasure, your grace. Axel hums, before chuckling again. You will also be under close watch, at least at first. I'll give your father what he wants and name you my master of coin, but after Baelish, you won't just be allowed to do whatever you want in the position. Both my hand and me will be watching closely for any slip-ups or fuck-ups. The punishment for even the smallest mistake could very well be incredibly severe. Swallowing hard, Tyrion nevertheless nods. He would be allowed to join Axel's small council, but he would be a master only in name. In actuality, he would be master of nothing until he'd managed to prove himself. Honestly, Tyrion didn't mind that one bit. I understand, your grace. Very well. Consider yourself my master of coin for the time being, Tyrion Lannister. Let's go and find Lord Davos and let him know. You'll be traveling back to King's Landing with him by ship, so you'll need a cabin. Tyrion can hardly believe his ears as he moves to follow the king out of the room. This was actually happening. He was going to be master of coin. He was going to escape his father's clutches, once and for all. Though, his stomach drops when Axel suddenly stops and turns around. For a brief heart-stopping moment, he fears that the king has second-guessed his decision. Thankfully that's not the case. Oh, and if you're looking for ways to score major points with me, Baelish claimed to have a whole lot of gold stashed away before he was executed for his crimes. I doubt it's in one piece, of course. Find any part of that and you'll be well on your way to truly proving yourself loyal. Tyrion blinks, before slowly nodding. All right, your grace. The smirk on Axel's face makes it clear he doesn't expect Tyrion to actually find much of anything. To be fair, Baelish would have had to have been an utter fool to hide anything he'd stolen in King's Landing, right? Then again, the man had to have a way of paying people, right? Certainly something to think about. Fortunately, it sounded like more of an afterthought than an actual expectation as part of his new duties. Tyrion would focus on proving he was truly capable of being master of coin before he went treasure hunting or anything like that. This was, in a very real way, his last chance to make something of himself. He wasn't going to screw it up. XXX. And so our new master of coin is recruited. 4 comments 0 vote. Chapter 73. A warning. Axel has one last thing to take care of before he goes home. XXX. Finally, it's the night before he's set to depart from the Iron Islands at long last. But first, there's one last thing he's decided that he has to do. Silently and without being seen, Axel departs from Ash's chambers, the new Lady Reaper of Pike exhausted and sleeping off their final goodbyes in her bed. He floats out through a nearby window so as to not disturb her rest, wordlessly flying away from the Isle of Pike and indeed a fair distance away from the Iron Islands altogether. However, he's not flying back to Westeros, no, he's going in the opposite direction entirely, flying out into the Sunset Sea. Unlike the narrow sea, that thin strip of water between Westeros and Essos that had been sailed across a million times by this point, the Sunset Sea was far more mysterious and uncharted. Its true size was still unknown to the people of Westeros, and nobody seemed to have any idea what existed on the other side of it. Some claimed that the Ironborn, rather than being descended from first men, came from visitors west of the Sunset Sea, and that the Seastone Chair itself was created on the other side of the body of water and brought to the Iron Islands oh so long ago with the first of those settlers. However, if any of that was the case, it happened so many thousands of years ago that even the Ironborn no longer had the knowledge that could confirm it. They certainly set themselves apart from the Greenlanders, as they called those on Westeros' mainland, but they did so irrespective of whether those Greenlanders were first men or Andals. Admittedly, there is some temptation to try to fly across the Sunset Sea and see what's on the other side. Hell, if Axel had discovered this ability to fly before becoming king, he could very well see himself trying a daring stunt like that or flying over to Essos to explore that foreign locale. Even now, his curiosity tugged at him, making him want to go and see what there was to see. But he can't. He has a responsibility to his people, to his future queens, and to Westeros as a whole. With Euron and Petter dead and Renly at the wall, Axel believes that the last of his major enemies has been dealt with. And given his feats displayed in this war, with tens of thousands of men having seen what he's truly capable of, he hopes that peace can finally reign over the Seven Kingdoms for longer than a few fucking months. Even if it only does so because of his strength. That peace won't happen without him though. He's needed back in King's Landing, standing tall and representing an insurmountable obstacle and impossible foe in the face of any other ambitions for his throne. However, it's that same sense of responsibility and duty that brings him out here, 1,000 or so miles away from the Iron Islands, flying high over crashing waves in every direction for as far as his eye can see. Euron's words have stuck with him over these past couple of weeks ever since he killed the man. Even though Axel has pushed them to the back of his mind, he hasn't been able to fully forget them after all this time. One day, I hope you kill him. I hope you find a way to wherever it is that a squirming worm like him hides and you slaughter him like you did the Kraken. Even if these are to be my final moments, I will take solace in that hope. Because he's not going to stop coming after you, Axel Baratheon. None of them are. Axel twitches, letting out an explosive breath as he stares down at the waves. Maybe he was imagining things, but it was almost like the water was reaching up for him, trying to grasp at him and drag him down into the depths as Euron's final words replayed in his mind's eye. The gods, you slow bastard. You are the champion of the Seven. They have laid claim to you, made you their own, and are using you to spread their will. Did you truly think the others would just let something as strong as you continue to exist? Do you think the drowned god is the only deity moving against you even now? No, oh no, no. This might be the end for me, but it's only the beginning for you. Was it possible? Axel honestly didn't know if the Seven even existed. It was the most positive explanation for his strangeness of course, but if he had been chosen as their champion, one would think that they would have contacted him more directly by now. And no, the High Septon and most devout constantly singing his praises and claiming that the light of the seven-pointed star was shining down upon him, didn't count. There'd never been so much as a whisper from any of the Seven. Axel would certainly remember if they'd spoken to him at any point throughout his life. And one would imagine that his constant trips to the Great Sept of Baelor would have given them ample opportunity to whisper in his ears as well. Ample opportunity that they'd seemingly ignored. But Euron had seemed sure of himself and that he'd spoken directly to the drowned god. He'd been convinced that it was the drowned god who forced them into conflict, that made him wage war against Axel. He'd also been convinced that the drowned god wouldn't stop coming for Axel even with this failure. And that couldn't be allowed. Narrowing his eyes, Axel descends until he's just a few dozen feet above the crashing waves. Drowned god, hear me, if you can. I am Axel Baratheon, first of his name, champion of the Seven. The ocean continues to rage, an unfathomable body of water that makes Axel shiver just thinking about it. Yet, there is no response. Axel clenches his jaw and curls his hands into fists. I have allowed worship of you to continue in the Iron Islands. I have not stricken your name from their lips, as I was tempted to do. Still nothing. Is Axel just screaming at a bunch of water? It certainly feels like it. Come for me and mine, and I swear I will not be so generous a second time. I will find you. I will hunt you to the end of the seas, until I locate where you hide and rip you from it root and stem. The threat seems to provoke no more response than his previous words. Huffing, Axel shakes his head. What the fuck am I doing? Even if the drowned god does exist, the only sort of language a creature like him would understand is violence. It hits him then, a half-remembered story from Asha. Grinning, he shouts one last time. I'm coming down there. Let's talk, you and I. And then, he sucks in a deep breath and dives, dropping beneath the ocean waves. Much like in his fight with Euron's Kraken, Axel finds himself sightless rather quickly. It was already dark above the water after all, making it even darker beneath the surface. However, Axel finds he doesn't mind all that much. Even without the ability to see, he feels like he can sense things around him. One of those things is the building pressure the deeper he goes. This far out from the Iron Islands, the sea is much deeper than it was where he fought Euron's Kraken. He's pretty sure he descends to the same depths he reached back there in mere moments now, and then just keeps going, with no end in sight. The further down he gets, the more pressure builds on his body, weighing him down. Is this just the weight of all the water above him? Or is this the presence of the drowned god himself, pushing down on him in an attempt to hold Axel in place? It won't work, of course. Neither restraining him nor drowning him. He'd noticed it during his fight with the Kraken, he really didn't need to breathe all that much. But then, looking back, Axel should have realized that when he was covered head to toe in wildfire and burned for an entire week. Sure, he might have gotten a little bit of air here and there, but most of the time he didn't even have functioning lungs or nostrils or a mouth. Yet still he'd lived somehow. This is similar to that, after a fashion. Holding his breath, Axel can tell that he would be able to last weeks down here solely off of a single lungful of air. There's no danger of him drowning down here, amusingly enough. The drowned god has no hold over him, even this far into the deity's supposed domain. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, Axel lands on solid ground. Well, mostly solid. It feels soft, like there might actually be sand down here. Eyes narrowing even though he still sees nothing, Axel stamps gently a few times until the sand is brushed away and there's nothing but rock beneath his feet. Only then, does he rear up a foot and bring it down as hard as he fucking can. Crackthum. It's as he did back during his fight with the Kraken, except this time Axel isn't pushing himself up, he's slamming himself down with all his might. And he doesn't stop at just one time either. Crackthum. 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 Water explodes in all directions around him as rock and ground and whatever else the sea floor is made as cracks and shatters beneath his feet. The world itself seems liable to shake apart, but then Axel had figured it might, which is why he went as far as he did away from the Iron Islands. He's not holding back right now. For the first time in his life, Axel doesn't hold back a single ounce of his full strength. It's not about destruction though. It's about sending a message. And as he stands there amidst the debris, Axel soon gets confirmation that the message has been received, when he just barely feels it in time before rows of massive, sharp teeth try to close around his body. His hands slam up, catching the huge jaw before it can snap shut on him, and Axel twists, rotating the massive shark away from him. And then his foot comes up and kicks through the shark's body, gouging out a hole in the sea creature that kills it instantly. Of course, that's just the first of many. Sea monsters of every stripe take their turns trying to tear a piece out of him. Axel can't see most of them, unfortunately, but he can certainly categorize them by what he feels as he proceeds with slaughtering them en masse. Of the smaller, there are sharks and other large but manageable fish, perhaps 3 or 4 times his size, but no bigger. And then there are the bigger ones. Krakens. Leviathans. Giant turtles. He cracks a shell with one punch while dodging a turtle's snapping jaws. He rips a tentacle off a kraken and whips a leviathan into full retreat with it. He fights like a man possessed. He fights like a man with something to prove, something to protect. The drowned god needs to know exactly what he's playing with. Maybe he thinks he simply didn't try hard enough. Maybe he thinks that it was Euron's fault, Euron's failure. Maybe he will try again in time, just like Euron Greyjoy said. Axel is down here in the depths this night to make it very clear that trying again would be a very bad idea. And so Axel fights. He fights for longer and in more dire straits than he's ever fought in his life. Under an ocean's worth of water, the pressure trying to pin him down and slow every move he makes, he fights sea monster after sea monster without fail. And whenever they depart, whenever they flee, he stomps his foot again, drawing in the next batch to fight him once more. Wave after wave of creatures comes at him. Until something new arrives. Something truly immense and so large that for a moment, Axel believes it to perhaps be the drowned god himself. The creature, which is longer than it is wide, slams into Axel with greater force than anything else has ever managed, and to Axel's bemusement, it begins to push him up. He punches it back down, of course, knocking it away for a second, but it just keeps coming. Until finally, he feels something new hit his back, light. He'd been fighting for so long on the bottom of the ocean that the sun had risen and it was early morning the next day. A moment after this realization, Axel breaks the surface of the water and finds himself airborne along with being able to see his last opponent for the first time. It has the head of a dragon that reminds him of Balerion the Black Dread's skull in the bowels of the Red Keep, but far, far bigger. However, the body is not that of a dragon, but rather a snake. It is, beyond a shadow of a doubt, bigger than even Euron's kraken had been. And, it seems almost intelligent in a way, as it blinks up at him and then turns back, as though its task was to get him out of the water and make him leave, rather than actually trying to kill him. As the massive sea serpent goes to disappear into the depths, Axel narrows his eyes and shakes his head. You think we're done? I say when we're fucking done. He darts back under the surface and reaches out, his fingers digging into the serpent's massive tail before it can fully vanish. And then, he heaves. This creature had made a singular mistake. Down at the bottom of the ocean, Axel had actually been weakened by the pressure, by the weight of all that water, and perhaps by the drowned god's very presence as well. But up here so close to the surface, his strength is no longer tied up in making sure he's not crushed against the sea floor. With a roar, Axel breaks through the surface again, this time dragging the sea serpent with him instead of being pushed. He pulls and pulls, having to fly much farther up than he did with Euron's kraken. As its head slips free of the water at long last, the great beast of a sea snake lets out a titanic, keening cry. But Axel is not moved by its panic. He feels no guilt or shame. Consider this your tribute, drowned god. A demigod child, sacrificed so that I don't fucking hunt you down. And then he carries the twisting sea snake back towards the Iron Islands, flying along with its writhing, twisting, gargantuan form held in his grasp. Good that he does too, because, well, as Axel begins to approach Pike once more, he realizes he might not have gone out far enough to send his message to the drowned god. There, about 100 miles away from the Iron Islands, is a wave. A massive wave, one that only seems to be growing as well. Now, Axel might not be the most learned of men, but he somewhat understands cause and effect. This wave, so tall that it will completely consume the Iron Islands, is coming from the same direction he did. He doesn't understand the how, but he understands the why. Maybe he could blame the drowned god for this, but deep down, Axel knew better. His actions caused this wave and likely generated further waves in every other direction as well. But this direction, the one that was about to kill everyone on the Iron Islands, was the only one that mattered. The only one that Axel cared about. For a moment, Axel clenches his jaw, uncertain what to do. And then the sea serpent still thrashing in his arms reminds him of its existence, and he suddenly knows exactly what he's going to do. With a wide grin, Axel flies forward, getting in front of the gargantuan wave. And then he winds up, just like he did with Euron's kraken. It's actually easier this time, since the sea serpent is just one extremely long body instead of a massive bulbous main body surrounded with many more flailing appendages. And as he spins it around, he times it just right, and slams the sea serpent face first into the wave just as it's coming past him. Kaboom! As he'd hoped, this has quite the effect on the building wave. The sea serpent's gargantuan body cuts through it and destabilizes a lot of the mounting water, sending it crashing backwards into the ocean below. As well, the sea serpent itself goes limper and stops struggling quite so much. But it's not enough. The wave is too big for one strike to be good enough. That's all right though. Axel still has a demigod to kill. So he repositions himself and swings again. And again. And again. Kaboom. 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 He uses the sea snake's massive body to whip the wave away before it can reach the Iron Islands. He tears through the water again and again with his improvised bludgeoning tool, until there's nothing left of the existential threat to Asha and her people. By the time he's done, he's also killed the sea serpent, rending its face into nothing more than a bloody skull and the scales on the top portion of its body into a veritable mess. That's okay though, in fact, that was mostly intended. Flying the last few dozen miles back to Pike, Axel slaps the sea serpent down onto the beach. Or rather, he drops its head and the first portion of its body down onto the beach. The rest of its truly massive, extremely long form disappears beneath the waves, draping across the sea floor just off of the island. As Axel comes in for a landing next to the flayed, gory skull of the sea serpent, he sees Asha running out onto the beach towards him, some of her people behind her. Her eyes are wide as she approaches him and his kill, her jaw dropped in disbelief. Her mouth opens and closes several times before she finally finds her voice. Your Grace, respectfully, what the fuck was that? This is a sea dragon. One of these has not been seen since the time of the Grey King. Axel grins wickedly, having eyes only for Asha even as his words are meant for the men behind her as well. Do you recall the story you told me, about the priest King Lodos who thought himself the son of the drowned god? Asha blinks rapidly before hesitantly nodding. Chuckling, Axel looks at his kill. A sea dragon, huh? So maybe not a demigod. Well, I found it inspiring. And I found myself needing a chat with the drowned god too, so we could lay some ground rules, so to speak. Reaching out, he slaps a hand on the exposed bone of the sea dragon's skull. I graciously offer this kill and all the wealth it contains to the newly appointed Lady Reaper of Pike. Along with the Kraken corpse currently atop her castle, let Asha Greyjoy decide what to do with this prize. And know this, your king has reached an understanding with the drowned god. Had he? Axel honestly wasn't sure, but he was more than willing to lie about it. And if the drowned god did make another move on him after this, then Axel would make good on his threats to hunt the bastard down, deity or no deity. He was done playing games. Anyone who dared to make him their enemy, was going to be in for a bad time. XXX. There are two ways to interpret this chapter emo. 1. Axel just went and showed the drowned god who was boss, killing his strongest monsters and maybe even slaughtering a demigod son of his in the form of this massive sea dragon. Or 2. Axel just went and picked a fight with a bunch of sea creatures while mistakenly thinking that ocean pressure was the drowned god's presence, as well as accidentally causing a tsunami in the process. And when the ancient sea dragon that his actions disturbed came to get him out of there, he turned the tables and used it to fix his mistake with the tsunami, killing it in the process. What do you guys think really happened? Chapter 74. In retrospect. Tywin Lannister has regrets. XXX. Tywin Lannister had many regrets, more than he would ever dare to let anyone know. He stands now atop Castle Rock's highest point, staring out at the fleet of ships represented by pinpricks in the distance. Those are the last of the Royal and Redwyne fleets, both armadas making the journey south to either return to the Arbor or continue onward all the way around Westeros to King's Landing. With their departure from the Iron Islands, the war between the Seven Kingdoms and Euron Greyjoy is officially over. And the greatest loser, by far, has to be the Westerlands. Tywin's jaw clenches at the thought, his hands clutching at the stone railing in front of him. Sure, the Ironborn had lost the war, failing in their latest bid to become independent from the Iron Throne yet again. And sure, most of their houses were lordless, their numbers completely decimated by the naval battles and the subsequent fight at Castle Pike. This left the rather numerous former thralls at an even more overwhelming advantage than they would have had before. But even if all of that was true, even if the Iron Islands were now ruled by a woman of all things, Tywin still felt that it was his lands and his house that had come out the worst from this whole mess. Kevin gone, Lannisport in ruins, the Lannister fleet destroyed yet again, and what exactly did they have to show for it? His demonic, stunted dwarf of a son made master of coin for the price of almost 1,000,000 golden dragons. Yes, Tywin Lannister had many regrets, but his greatest regret of all was most certainly allowing the shock and surprise of Robert, Joffrey, and Tommen's deaths to get the better of him all that time ago. If only he'd moved more quickly. If only he'd acted the moment information arrived from King's Landing. If he'd been exceptionally swift, Tywin could have even been in the city before Jon Arryn even got back with Axel Baratheon. Of course, if he'd known what Axel was truly capable of, he would have done everything in his power to ingratiate himself with the young man, no matter his origins, no matter the fact that his ascension was all but spitting in the face of Tywin's family and all the plans he'd ever made. Hells, maybe if he'd played his cards right, he could have countered Cersei's insane plans, helped Axel come into his own, and even wound up replacing Jon Arryn as Hand of the King when the small council went up in flames. And even after he'd missed that first opportunity, Tywin still could have moved faster when Renly Baratheon made his treasonous intentions clear. At the time, holding back and seeing how everything panned out had seemed like the smart thing to do. Why spend the strength of his lands against the combined armies of the Reach and the Stormlands for the sake of a Baratheon bastard who had taken everything from him, after all? Of course, knowing what he knew now, Tywin would have gladly spent the lives of his small folk to earn goodwill with Axel Baratheon. The bastard had turned out to be no bastard at all. He'd turned out to be something else entirely. Unfortunately, an unknowing Tywin had earned his house the king's enmity through his actions. To be fair, none of it made sense. Even now, Tywin couldn't begin to explain how Axel could do the things he could do. Surviving a gauntlet of poisons, up to and including the Strangler. Freakish, but perhaps not the most freakish thing Tywin had ever heard of. Surviving what multiple witnesses swore should have been a fatal blow in that trial by the Seven. Again, it wasn't outside of the realm of possibilities, even if Pycelle had been both baffled and irate that he wasn't even allowed to examine and administer aid to the king's wound. Now, surviving the wildfire explosion was where things had begun to get unbelievable. Burning for 7 days and 7 nights while kneeling before the statue of the father in the Great Sept of Baelor had sounded particularly farcical to Tywin when he'd first heard about it. And yet, that had been followed by rumors that Axel Baratheon somehow traveled to the Eyrie, administered justice to Petyr Baelish and Lysa Arryn, and then was back in King's Landing within 3 days max. That had sounded distinctly odd as well, but Tywin assumed it was some mummer's trick, a body double of sorts. In fact, using mummer's tricks and body doubles could have explained the wildfire too. It could not explain everything Tywin had heard about the battles against the Ironborn, however. When the first ships carrying Lannister men had arrived back at the ruins of Lannisport after the subjugation of the Ironborn, Tywin had spent an entire day interviewing sailors and knights from the Westerlands, getting their stories from them and writing down his own observations. By the time he was done, there was simply no denying it. No mummer's tricks could possibly explain it away. Especially not when everyone told the same exact story. Not only had Axel leapt from his flagship into the water to do battle with Euron's Kraken directly, but he'd also then gone on to kill the damn thing, and reveal he had the ability to fly to boot. That, Tywin had to admit, that news just about broke him. Axel Baratheon had turned out to be no man, but a monster instead. Even a demon perhaps, except by this point it was too late to possibly try and tar him with that brush. Jon Arryn must have known. He must have counseled the young king to hide his true abilities and build his relationship with the Faith of the Seven for as long as possible. Then, when Jon had died, Axel had stopped holding back. And yet, it didn't matter anymore because by then, the Faith was on his side. And they would always be on his side, no matter what. As far as the High Septon and most devout were concerned, he wasn't a demon or a monster, he wasn't some sort of sorcerer or witch practicing magic. No, he was blessed by the Seven. He was the avatar of the warrior. What he really was dangerous. That was what it truly boiled down to in the end. Axel had single-handedly killed the same Kraken that had sunk the Lannister fleet and destroyed all of Lannisport. And he could fly under his power without the aid of dragons or even wings. Meaning that he could be anywhere in the Seven Kingdoms, likely within a day. Meanwhile, House Lannister had never been weaker. And, there was nothing Tywin could do about it. Forgiving the crown's remaining debt in order to get Tyrion onto the small council was the most that he could get away with at this point. Aside from that small amount of influence and the hope that Tyrion would not disgrace himself or the name Lannister any more than he already did by existing, all Tywin could do was turn his gaze closer to home. Lannisport had to be rebuilt. The Westerlands would come together and gold would flow from the mines into the pockets of many men to make that happen. At the same time, House Lannister had to be rebuilt as well. Fortunately, his otherwise useless daughter was pregnant. So long as she had a son, then that would be Tywin's heir. Otherwise, it would have to be Kevin's son Lancel of all people, and Tywin would rather that not wind up being necessary. Thinking of his daughter causes Tywin's lips to thin out. Cersei had been downright hysterical when she'd been brought back to Castle Rock. Losing Myrcella had been too much for her and her mind had cracked, or so Tywin had thought. Thankfully, the Maester had been able to help calm her down these past several months with remedies from his stores. Now Tywin found himself going over some of the things she'd said to him in the moments where he thought her mind was truly lost. He'd never believed her for a second on any of it, of course. But now he was forced to acknowledge that she'd probably been telling the truth when she claimed the steel dagger shattered against Axel's flesh that day in King's Landing. After all, if the man could single-handedly survive the tentacles of a kraken capable of destroying stone walls thousands of years old, he could probably survive a single blade wielded by a woman of Cersei's age and lacking physical strength. He could likely survive a lot more than that, even. But then, if she'd been speaking the truth when he thought she was being hysterical about that, then that called into question whether she'd been telling the truth about the rest of it as well. Such as betting the young king multiple times, as well as what she'd screamed at him in regard to the true parentage of all three of her children. No, Tywin refused to believe that last one. Cersei had only been trying to say the vilest things possible in an attempt to hurt him. It really was good that the Maester had been able to calm her down. And besides, even if she had been telling the truth about sleeping with Axel Baratheon before she tried to kill him, it wasn't like anything came of it, unfortunately. That might turn out to be Tywin's greatest regret of all, in the long run. If only Cersei had been knocked up by Axel Baratheon, well, to be fair, it wasn't as though they knew for a fact yet whether whatever powers the king had even could be inherited by his children. But if they could, that power in the hands of House Lannister would have been truly wonderful. No matter. Tywin can no longer distract himself with what could have been. Nor could he allow himself to be distracted by what was happening in King's Landing or anywhere else on the continent. He had to change his focus. There were only so many years he had left in his old bones and he would be damned if he left the house in an even worse state than his father did before he was finally gone. Shaking his head, the old lion turns and heads back downstairs into the rock to get back to work. As a result, he's just half a minute too late to witness with his own eyes as something flies by incredibly fast hundreds of feet overhead. Something, vaguely human-shaped. XXX. Glancing down at Castle Rock as he zips by it, Axel snorts derisively. He'll be glad to never have to see the place or another Lannister aside from Tyrion ever again, truth be told. Hopefully, nobody would fuck around and make him come back here anytime soon. For now, as he leaves the massive natural fortification behind him in the distance, Axel slows down a bit and enjoys the scenery. He never in a million years thought that he would see the whole of Westeros like this from this high up. In fact, he stops for a moment just past the hills of the Westerlands, about halfway to King's Landing, and just turns in a slow circle while hovering in midair. He can see so much from here. To the north, he can make out the mountains of the moon. To the south he sees the rolling farmland of the Reach as well as the Kingswood and the Dornish marches beyond them. Back behind him are the Westerlands of course, and if he turns just right, he can't quite see the Iron Islands from here. But he nevertheless knows they're there. And of course, in front of him to the east is King's Landing which he can just barely make out as a speck on the horizon at the moment. Past King's Landing is Essos and the free cities, foreign lands with foreign ideals, such as slavery and other concepts that turn his stomach. Axel's hands curl into fists for a moment at that, his eyes narrowing and his jaw clenching. Part of him didn't want to stop at just the Iron Islands. Part of him wanted to take his armies and his fleets and go to Essos next. Bravos might just welcome him with open arms from what he knew about them. Meanwhile, the likes of Pentos, Myr, Tyrosh, and Lee would fall before him like wheat before the scythe. He could conquer them single-handedly given his capabilities, and end slavery in each of them for all time. Except, no. Axel knows better. Could he conquer them? Sure. Could he free all the slaves? For as long as he stuck around, yes. But what about afterwards? The only reason that ending thraldom and the claiming of salt wives on the Iron Islands might work is because most of the Ironborn had died and the Iron Islands needed Westeros more than Westeros needed the Iron Islands. Even then, he was glad he would have an excuse to go and visit Asha every month or so in order to get her pregnant as she'd requested, because it would also allow him to make sure his edicts were being followed and nobody was fomenting rebellion against the new Lady Reaper of Pyko or their king. However, if he went and conquered any of the free cities of Essos, he wouldn't just be stretching Westeros too thin, he'd be stretching himself too thin as well. Axel's greatest weakness at this point was the fact that he couldn't be everywhere at once. And the longer he was absent from Westeros, the more likely that someone back here would probably get uppity and try something in his absence. Axel sighs, closes his eyes, and pushes thoughts of conquering Essos aside. He had enough on his plate at this point. Especially with 2 women waiting back in King's Landing to become his queens. His eyes snap back open and Axel grins as he takes in his surroundings one last time. After luxuriating in the beautiful view in all directions, Axel continues on towards King's Landing, where he can finally announce that he'll be wedding Arianne and Sansa at long last. Needless to say, he doesn't expect to encounter any objections to that decision at this point. Indeed, anyone who might have had a problem with him taking 2 queens instead of 1 would no doubt hold their tongue just based on his newfound ability to fly. Everything was going to be just fine from here on out. Axel could finally focus on ruling peacefully and making a family. XXX. This will probably be the last time we see much mention of the Lannisters in this FIC, with the exception of Tyrion of course. Funnily enough, the original outline for this story involved Cersei being way less crazy and sticking around as a long-term member of Axel's harem, and eventually when Jon died, she would have pushed for her father to become Hand of the King instead of Stannis. But then the more I wrote the first 2 arcs, with Cersei being way too crazy to be redeemed and Tywin dragging his feet to the point of angering Axel severely, I realized it just didn't make much sense anymore. But at least we'll get more Tyrion. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 75. Sacrifice. The final chapter of Arc 4. You know how Axel thought everything would be fine at the end of last chapter. Well, everything is not fine. I repeat, everything is not fine. XXX. It is time, my queen. Melisandre smiles softly as Daenerys stiffens at the sound of her voice. They've been sitting in silence for quite some time now as Melisandre painted across the younger woman's naked flesh. But no longer. They must act, or all the hard work and preparation of these past several hours will have been for nothing. Are you ready, Your Grace? Shivering in a way that has nothing to do with the cold night air and positively trembling with emotion, Daenerys Targaryen nevertheless rises to her feet as she slowly nods. She's still so young, despite being over 20 years of age. But then, 2 decades is a pittance to someone who has lived as long as Melisandre, and even less when you took into account how the brothers' overbearing shadow had stunted Daenerys' growth. I'm ready. Collect your whelps and walk into the flames. Make sure that the sacrifices of your husband and son are not in vain. A whimper leaves Daenerys' lips at the reminder, but she nevertheless does as she's told. She's more than used to listening to Melisandre at this point, after all. Which is good because the Red Priestess is the only one capable of navigating the last Targaryen through the treacherous and perilous path ahead. Stepping forward, Daenerys makes a noise in the back of her throat, and her dragons come to her. They've grown in the months since they were first hatched, but not fast enough. Even with a Khalasar turned towards feeding them, they're still barely as large as wild dogs. Nevertheless, they respond to their mother's call. Encircling Daenerys, the 3 small dragons follow her as she steps away from Melisandre's side. Her feet take her towards the burning funeral pyre where the wrapped bodies of Khal Drogo and their stillborn child are laid out on the wood. The blood that Melisandre used to paint Daenerys' body mostly came from Drogo's bloodriders, who would have otherwise fled in the night if Melisandre had not stopped and captured them. Their connection to Daenerys and her comatose husband was strong, though the connection between Daenerys and her stillborn son was even stronger still. Melisandre had no intentions of letting Daenerys know that she'd bled the babe's body dry and mixed its blood in with the blood of Drogo's bloodriders, however. The mother of dragons might have been willing to accept the former sacrifice, but she would not be able to accept the latter. Melisandre had seen it in the flames, she knew just how much she could push her young charge, at least for now. She'd seen a lot in the flames, as a matter of fact. R'hllor, Lord of Light, had spoken to her quite a bit over the past few years and Melisandre had followed her god's bidding in all things. The Great Other stirred in the far north, and it was up to her to find Azor Ahai and prepare them for what was to come. For a time, Melisandre had believed that Azor Ahai was none other than Stannis Baratheon, the younger brother of Robert Baratheon, King of Westeros. She had traveled all the way from Ashai by the shadow to Pentos in preparation for making the last leg of her journey to Dragonstone, when everything had changed. Suddenly, the visions in the flames no longer pointed to Stannis Baratheon. He was not, in fact, Azor Ahai reborn as she'd previously thought. And the Great Other was not the only enemy stirring in Westeros either. Melisandre had seen quite clearly that if she went to Westeros by herself, if she went to Stannis Baratheon's side, then she would die alongside him in a failed bid for the Iron Throne. Instead, Melisandre had been instructed to turn her gaze to closer by. In the end, her journey to Pentos had not been a total waste as she had found herself coming upon the last Targaryens, Viserys, and Daenerys Stormborn. The Red Priestess had known from the moment she laid eyes on them that Daenerys, for all her shyness and reserved attitude, was Azor Ahai reborn. Viserys, on the other hand, was simply dead weight at first, though they'd eventually found a use for him when Melisandre's lord had shown her a way to help Daenerys hatch the petrified dragon eggs gifted to her at her wedding to Khal Drogo. From there, Melisandre had been shown so much more by her lord. R'hllor was a powerful god with a far reach, though unfortunately his reach did not extend too far into Westeros. Even still, she was able to understand what he was showing her. Axel Baratheon, firstborn bastard son of Robert Baratheon, he was the threat. On par with that of the Great Other, he represented a danger to Melisandre's lord that could not be understated. Daenerys' place in the grand tapestry of fate was not just to grow her dragons, gather her armies, and take her rightful place on the Iron Throne. Her destiny was also to destroy the demon Axel Baratheon and then prepare Westeros for the return of the Great Other and his White Walkers. Only once Axel Baratheon was dead and gone, only once the worship of R'hllor spread across all of Westeros, could they hope to defeat ice, with overwhelming fire. A broader smile spreads across Melisandre's perfectly sculpted lips as she watches Daenerys step into the flames of her husband and child's funeral pyre. As both the mother of dragons as well as her draconic children disappear into the fire, she lets out a shuddering breath, knowing that everything was going according to plan, even if the plan had to keep changing. After foreseeing how Viserys would be of use in hatching the eggs, Melisandre had next seen how the Westerosi Ser Jorah Mormont would make an attempt on her, Daenerys, and the dragon hatchlings' lives. She'd also seen a route by which Jorah could have perhaps been persuaded by Daenerys' kind heart to stay his blade and admit his duplicity, but that route did not provide the best outcomes. Instead, Melisandre had kept Daenerys from unknowingly influencing Ser Jorah away from his assassination attempt. She had allowed him to try and fail to harm so much as a hair on either of their heads. And she had watched along with Daenerys as Drogo had given Jorah Mormont an execution even worse than he'd intended for Viserys before she had Daenerys beg to be allowed to do it herself. All of that was necessary to help steel young Daenerys' heart, as well as inflame Drogo's rage at Westeros. At the time, the plan had been all about focusing the Khal and his Khalasar on invading Westeros and helping Daenerys kill Axel Baratheon. Unfortunately, the plan had once more been forced to change when Melisandre's visions in the fire kept changing as well. She'd seen Axel Baratheon burn for 7 days and 7 nights in a holy place dedicated to the Seven who are one. She'd watched him travel in leaping bounds across a great expanse of land, far faster than any man should be able to travel. These visions of the future had led to a stark realization. Drogo and his Khalasar wouldn't be enough. Daenerys and her dragons, even if they could be grown big enough for battle, would also die in the face of the Demon King's power. And worst of all, by that point Daenerys was already pregnant. Weakened by pregnancy, held back by fear for her child, Melisandre had seen future after future in the flames where the last Targaryen simply gave up. That couldn't be allowed to happen, obviously. Failure was not an option. The demon on the Iron Throne had to die just as much as the Great Other had to be defeated. This, Melisandre felt R'hllor had made abundantly clear to her. And that meant Melisandre had to make some difficult decisions. She'd come to care for Daenerys in her own way as they'd traveled together, she really had. The young woman wasn't just Azor Ahai reborn or her charge, no, she was Melisandre's protege in a lot of ways. The Mother of Dragons enjoyed learning and tended to soak up Melisandre's knowledge like a sponge. And while she had been sad to sacrifice her brother, Melisandre knew that Daenerys was happy to be out from under Viserys' thumb, and to have 3 dragons who answered to her beck and call out of the deal. Unfortunately, she'd been forced to do things that she would have rather not in order to secure their future. In truth, Melisandre suspected that if Daenerys ever learned the part she'd played in Drogo's death and the stillbirth of their only son, she would not be nearly as happy anymore. That was fine though, for the Red Priestess didn't intend for Daenerys to ever find out. What was done, and sometimes sacrifices had to be made. Drogo wouldn't have been strong enough, but by dying here alongside his son, it would galvanize Daenerys into action. Not only that, their sacrifice by flame and the blood of Drogo's bloodriders and the stillborn babe would combine to create something truly special, something capable of bringing the demon in Westeros low, once and for all. Just as that thought comes to Melisandre's mind, the flames covering the funeral pyre suddenly sputter, and begin to coalesce. The smile on Melisandre's lips turns into a full-grown grin as the fire condenses down in on itself until it's coating four distinct shapes. The funeral pyre, wood and wrapped bodies alike, has been reduced to nothing but ash in a fraction of the time it otherwise should have. Meanwhile, Daenerys and her 3 dragons step away changed. The fire flows over the Dragon Queen's flesh, absorbing bit by bit into the blood runes that Melisandre had just spent hours painstakingly painting onto every inch of the Targaryen's skin. Meanwhile, the flames covering her 3 dragons are likewise absorbed into their scales, inch by inch. When it's finally over, the blood runes are gone and so is the fire. Daenerys stands there before Melisandre and what remains of the late Khal Drogo's Khalasar still completely nude, but dramatically changed. All across her body pulse burning veins of orange, as though the fire that had engulfed her now resides within her instead. Which of course, it does. That was the whole point. No more is this more obvious than Daenerys' eyes, which glow bright orange with power, so bright that it's almost impossible to look directly into them. Akin to looking directly at 2 miniature suns with how much power Melisandre sees there. The 3 dragons at Daenerys' feet are much the same. Their eyes glow orange with their mother's might, and they themselves have grown to twice their previous size in the short time they were among the flames. No longer the size of small dogs, they now resemble small horses instead. And they will only get bigger going forward, so long as the sacrifices continue to flow. But then, Melisandre has a plan for that. They won't be able to go straight to Westeros after this. In fact, they won't be able to go to Westeros for quite a while yet. But eventually they'll be ready. This was the first step on the only path forward that didn't end in failure. Melisandre had seen it all in the flames. Raising her arms and spreading them wide, Melisandre lets her voice ring out in the silent night. Azor Ahai stands before you. Her flaming sword internal, her will made manifest. The Queen of Dragons will lead you all to glory. A stir starts up among the watching Dothraki who remain. Cries of, Azor Ahai, and, Queen of Dragons and, Khaleesi, fill the night air. Daenerys stares out at them all with her glowing orange eyes, a sense of raw and unrefined purpose wafting off of her. Her husband and son may be dead, but the last Targaryen still had people to lead and dragons to feed. She still had a destiny to fulfill, and Melisandre is gratified to watch his determination and resolve fill every pore of her protege's being. Melisandre would take what had been created tonight and she would refine it and forge it into a proper weapon. She would make Daenerys Targaryen into what she had to become in order to survive what fate had in store for her. Daenerys Targaryen was more than Azor Ahai reborn, she was the Lord of Light's champion, his answer to the demon over in Westeros. And so long as she was ready to make the necessary sacrifices along the way, then Melisandre was confident they would emerge victorious when all was said and done. XXX. AN. Dun dun duuuun. See you all next time for the start of Arc 5.